No. Yeah, that's right. Good evening. Thank you for joining us here today. We got started a few minutes late to make sure that everybody got through the line. My name is Denise Koch. I work for the City of Norwood, Juneau. I'm the Director of Engineering and Public Works Department. And I have requested that the Army Corps come and do a public meeting. The Army Corps has been a great partner to CDJ, been working with us on many facets related to the flood, whether it's short-term mitigation, long-term mitigation. And I just wanted to let folks know that today's presentation is primarily focused on what individuals can do at their home. But afterwards, there's going to be an open Q&A, and people can come up and ask whatever questions they would like. I'll refer to Dan. Did you want to say a couple of words before we get started?
Sure. My name is Dan Howard. I work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Emergency Management. I'm here with Philip Martinez, raise your hand, Philip, and Mike Records. You'll see their positions on one of the slides, and we planted and really our SME here for HESCO barriers, which is probably what we're going to have most of our questions on tonight. You guys want to start? Sure. There we go. We've already introduced this slide, and I think you know what that is on the slide. Okay. This is going to be our agenda, or how we're going to go.
So first off, what we're going to talk about the Army Corps advanced measures, and then we'll go into preparing for a flood event as homeowners, knowing your flood risk, looking at flood maps, talking about this specific flood in general, as well as ways to identify flood-prone areas near your house, what to do before, during, and after evacuation, and then going more in depth in the flood preparedness checklists. And then talk about public health and flooding, as well as sandbagging and HESCO barriers and flood mitigation strategies, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, as well as a brief introduction to the flood insurance program. Dan, go ahead and talk about administration, please.
So public law 8499 is how the Corps of Engineers does rehabilitation of levees. It also does something called advanced measurement, which is what we'll pay for the HESCO barriers that come here. And these are the things on the left side of this slide. You'll see that there are standards that have to be met, right? So there has to be imminent threat of unusual flooding, which I think we have that, right? I think we experienced it, right? The governor had to request our assistance, which he has done. The non-federal interest, which is CDJ, has to commit available resources, which is labor, supplies, equipment, funds, and National Guard, if possible, right? Basically for labor. The benefit to cost ratio, this is always a big question. You will meet this, right? We are protecting a lot of property, right? And CDJ had to execute the cooperative agreement, which they did in September. So we have hit all the prerequisites, so we can do this by federal law. Okay, so on the right side of the slide are things that are like stipulations of the public law 499 advanced measures, right? No assistance for erosion damage. Assistance solely for to prevent erosion damage is not authorized. All right, not permitted, sorry. But some things that we can do is we can dredge the channel, we can make the river capable, or the river channel capable of maintaining its flow. Right, so we can bring in through our civil works dredging methods and so forth to ensure that the river channel can hold the amount of water. The issue is, we don't know how much water that is. So we can only return it to what it is, or what it was prior to probably the 2023 flood. Right, does anybody know what that is? No. Right, so a study will have to be done to figure that out. Permanent improvements are not authorized. Now, we're gonna kind of beat a little drum here. We are gonna make some permanent improvements. Not the Board of Engineers necessarily, but TDJ is gonna do it. We put these HESCO barriers in. We are gonna prevent or armor the walls, prevent those HESCO barriers from falling in the river due to erosion. Right, so we're violating a couple of the rules, so. Okay. The public sponsor must agree to remove the advanced measures. In other words, all the things that we do, minus the revetment, if you will, or the armament of the bank, you don't have to remove that, but you will have to remove the HESCO barrier. All right? Yeah, and that cannot cost, you say that's the United States Army Corps of Engineers in case, like, and sometimes I speak in acronyms, I'm sorry about that. All right? So you can see up there the cost. So the investigative costs, there are multiple things we're gonna concern ourselves with investigative costs. Because when we get further into this presentation, we're gonna talk about things we can do right now, short-term mitigation techniques, which is, that's the very. The advanced measures, they fall under advanced measures, USACE is gonna pay for that. Okay, engineering design, USACE is also gonna pay for that. We're also gonna pay for temporary construction. That doesn't mean CBJ's labor, right? They have to pay for that. But we can pay for these things. And you can see that the 100% non-federal for removal of the construction project. Okay, now when we say temporary, HESCO barriers are meant to last 5 to 8 years in a high UV environment. We don't have a high UV environment here. Right? So right, but that means it'll last a lot longer. So what does temporary mean? Someone's gonna be a permanent project. That's from my perspective, okay? But you will have to remove them when the time comes. Okay, next slide, please.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay.
You all hear me?
Thanks, Sam.
All right. I'm Mike Records. I'm a hydraulic engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm here because my research and education is actually on these outburst events. So this is a really, it's, you all know, it's the only place in North America that this situation is happening. So I feel very fortunate professionally to get to be part of this. Obviously no one ever wants it to happen, but I'm glad that I can support whatever way that looks like. So of course you all are way more familiar with this event than I am, but I'm just going to run through basically what these events are, just for background. So the original word here is Jökulá, which in Icelandic means glacier run. We've abbreviated that to GLOF, which is a glacier lake outburst flood. And like Dan said, we like our acronyms in the DoD. It's easier to say. But so basically, what the event is here, and ice is really interesting because in a long time scale, it flows like a fluid. You look at the Mendenhall River, look at it over the years, the Mendenhall Glacier, it acts like a river. It's slowing down. Then in a short time, it acts like a solid. And so this lake is forming behind the glacier, it's building up, and eventually the pressure under the glacier from the lake is so much so that it actually starts to form the ice, and making it act like the plastic, and these pipes are forming under the glacier. And at some point, those pipes basically they creep all the way through, and that's when the event is happening. And we'll get to this on a future slide, but you all have seen that on the gauge on the Suicide Basin Lake, as well as in the Mendenhall River. You see the Suicide Basin Lake start to rise. You all know the event's coming, and then that's what's happening. That what's reflected in that gauge is what's happening under the glacier. The lake's filling, the pipes are opening, and then when they're open, that's when the lake starts to drain, the water rushes down the river. So that's basically, and then like this fall happened, and we have these preceding smaller outburst events. So what's going on there is those pipes start to close. And they keep closing over time. They're acting like a plastic. And then when the pressure starts building again, it's opening them back up. So the more time they have to close between events, they're closing more and more, which is why in a lot of ways this fall event very fortunate for us in terms of giving us a reprieve before the next event. That's a quick overview kind of physics of these geoblock block events. Like I talked about on the last slide, y'all are familiar with looking at the Mendenhall River gauge, looking at the suicide basin gauge, the inundation map, the maps that the Weather Service puts together. I know these are clunky federal websites, hard to navigate. What I'm doing right now is run through how to quickly get to them. For y'all's situational awareness, when you're out there at your homes, you can monitor what's going on so that you're preparing, aware of when the next event may come and how big and when it may come. And where it is relative to the past events. So I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of run through an example of getting on Google, plugging in search, and we'll take it to each page for anyone who's not familiar with how to do that. So if you could go to Google, that'd be great. So let's Google. All right.
Oh, shoot, hold on. I don't know why it's not it started. No, it's you know why?
Great, all right, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna Google Mendenhall River Juneau NOAA. And this is gonna help us this is gonna show everyone how to efficiently get to the inundation maps. And once you're there, you can bookmark it. It's a little funny, but we'll get it all lined up. So Philip Google that. Now he's gonna click on the first link there. All right, now scroll down, Philip. Keep going. Okay, oh, that's good. So now Philip is going to click on activate MNDA2 partner FIM. Okay, now Philip, you zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, yes.
Just so we can kind of look at the whole area of people that are impacted, the whole neighborhood here. Thanks. Okay, and then the next thing that we can do is, so you're starting to see there, obviously Mendenhall Lake going down here through View Drive, and then Philip pulls up more. We can get down to the middle neighborhoods with the proposed stage one is here, the Mendenhall.
Helpful to change the layers and show satellite.
Great idea. So thank you. Great. And then, so this is a great preliminary tool for visualizing the extent of event. Like all modeling with limited information, and the reality of these events are changing over time, and the channel is changing. So two events that are the same size are not going to be exactly the same between years. But at this point, this is the best resource, although, and this is something we'll talk about, there will be improved modeling on these mapping. So we can click on 16th event, which is what we're on, and see what it looks like. in this phase one neighborhood, we could look at 15-foot event. Like happened in 2023. Other smaller events. So again, there's updated modeling coming. This is a great place to start in terms of visualizing your risks and your preparedness for the events. All right, now we'll look at how to get to the Mendenhall River stream gauge. So we'll do in this case, we'll just Google. Let's do the suicide basin lake gauge next. So we'll Google Glacier Lake near Hawk Bay, USGS. First link. Great, no data available, let's turn it off for the winter, that's fine, we'll look at the year. So this is a really informative page that's really helpful for visualizing these events as well as preparing for the next one. So what you can see is the event that you all know about, that August 2024 event. You see the long buildup, like we're talking about, the lake is filling up, those pipes are preparing to open, they're opening. When they open, it's all draining out under them. There's no more water pressure. The pipes start to close again. The lake starts to build up again. The pipes are not completely closed. So it's not going to take as much water pressure as last time because it hasn't been as long, so the pipes aren't closed all the way. So that's what we're seeing, this second rise of fall that y'all were monitoring for this smaller glacier outburst event this fall. So again, go to Google, plug in Glacier Lake near Hawk Bay, USGS, and click on that first link, and you can look back. If you scroll up, you can look back at historic data, different time periods, 7 days, 30 days, 1 year. It's turned off in the winter, as you can see, it'll turn back on in the spring. You can look at how high it got last year before the peak. You can look at where it got this fall for the smaller event. That'll help you with your situational awareness and preparedness for the next event that's going to come. All right, then we'll look at the Mendenhall River gauge just to complete the picture. So this time we're going to Google Mendenhall River USGS through flow. Google's watching all of us, plugging part of it, you'll probably get what you want. And then, once you find it, bookmark it, so you don't have to Google it again. It's some long federal address, it's gonna be hard to type in. Yep, top address. And let's go to 1 year. Yeah, so for a little more background here, that suicide basin gauge, that's up in the basin. The Mendenhall River gauge is down on the lake. So the difference here is the lake filling, the suicide basin gauge, as opposed to down the Mendenhall River, as the lake drains, as the suicide basin lake drains under the glacier in Mendenhall Lake and starts to route down the river. So that's why it's important to look at two of them and understand the two of them. So Phil's highlighted the record August 2024 event. And flooding, of course, happens everywhere, but this mechanism and how suds comes on is very unique. And when you all experience it, you can really see on the Mendenhall River gauge just how fast it rises and just how fast it falls. You all know that, you've all experienced it. But why that's significant is even if this ESCO barrier is implemented, is the events happen fast. When it's there, you still need to evacuate your homes. You cannot stay there. Just as that ESCO barrier is there, it's designed to protect the neighborhoods. But there's a trend towards larger events. That doesn't mean it's going to keep happening that way, but it could. So it's important to still evacuate. As these events come on, the trend is towards larger events. So that's basically a summary of 3 useful tools for preparing for these events. looking at the NOAA inundation mapper, looking at the suicide basin lake gauge, which shows you can compare where it's currently at versus where it's at before the record event. And then looking at the Mendenhall River gauge, the electric when event happens, or to whether it's putting out warnings, you can actually monitor the rise in the river as that's happening. Hopefully that provides a little bit of background, the mechanism of the event as well.
Where's the location of the river gauge?
The river gauge is located on the South Cascaders. On the, it's at the west bank. Sorry, I didn't see you asked that question. Okay, thanks. Yeah, we could pull that up for you. And so that is an interesting point because, you know, often river gauges are actually located on the river themselves instead of on the lake. But the measurements are used to develop a relationship between the river gauge and the flow of the river. The measurements are done on the river itself. So if you pull up Google Maps, please. Mendenhall Lake. Yeah, so the gauge is located somewhere in this area on the northwest bank of Mendenhall Lake. But the discharge measurements are used to develop a relationship from water depth and discharge are done on the river itself. So they're representative of flows at the outlet of the lake.
There is a little nicer website to go to that'll give you both of those monitoring. It's a suicide basin monitoring site. So you can just Google suicide basin Juneau. The first thing that comes up, at least on my phone, is suicide basin monitoring in current conditions.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's a great study and
Yeah, both the river and the basin.
yeah. So whether your style is or your preferences, that is a site that has all the resources right on there. Googling, like you said, suicide basin, you know. I think what's the next slide, Philip?
Identifying floodplain areas.
Anyways, it's following up here with Philip. I've seen a lot of you walk the river and really appreciate y'all taking time to come in here and listen to us.
Yeah. So the next part is to identifying flood-prone areas near your house. And part of that is looking at the FEMA flood maps, using online flood risk tools, consulting your local CBJ engineers, and then reviewing your property's flood history and talking to your neighbors. We talked to a bunch of the neighbors on every walk that I've been to, and they know what happened to their property better than anybody. So the next part is talking more about evacuation and what you should do before, during, and after a flood occurs, or when the flooding disaster happens. And then, so part of the before is the preparation of evacuation, learning the types of disasters that affect your community, planning your evacuation, checking what shelters are available in your space to go to, safe place to go to. And then what to do with your pets. That's a big that's a big issue when you're talking about public shelters who only allow service animals. And then be familiar with the alternative routes, because sometimes your main routes may be flooded. So knowing your area and the roads that are come in and out of your area and following all of the emergency guidelines that are out there. And then make sure that you follow up with family members, and prepare a go bag, that's ready for you to carry, when you evacuate. So even if you have to evacuate, even if you can't, have to move your car, get out of your car, then you have your go bag with you and you don't have to carry a big tote or whatever. And then also, if you do have a car, making sure that you have a full tank of gas on evacuation day, which in this case is not very long. Is not a very good amount of time to prepare, but also always keeping your car half full that time, around that time of year, is helpful. And then always carrying an emergency kit in your car. And then next is during evacuation, the FEMA app is really helpful to get updates and prepare for flooding. And then listening to the radio, and following the local evacuation rules, actually taking your emergency supply kit with you. Sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle when you're dealing with kids and pets and all other things that you have to deal with. And then leaving early enough to make sure that you're clear of the severe weather. And then actually telling your emergency contacts when and where you're going, and then securing your house by closing and locking doors and windows, unplugging electrical equipment, mainly small appliances, TVs. And if there's a risk of flooding, then unplugging your fridge or freezer, just so that there's no electrical current that runs through the water. And then following evacuation routes, don't take shortcuts, which seems pretty obvious, but can cause other issues. And then being aware of the road hazards, and hopefully emergency services out there directing people, but sometimes if you see a flooded area, don't go through it, even if there's no emergency personnel out there. And then even after evacuation, preparing for disruptions to daily life, which you're returning to a disaster area, so there's down trees and down power lines, and being aware that there's hazards that you can't see in the area, and just being extra cautious. And then also, once again, communication, letting your friends know when and where, when you're leaving and arriving at your destination, and then charging your devices, filling up your tank of your gas, filling up your tank, and then bringing extra food and water just in case the water hasn't been turned back on in your house, and having food to eat. And then once again, like I said earlier, avoiding down power lines. So this next section goes into what to do before a flood event, and it's how to prepare the outside of your house. Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. So a lot of what's going on here is we were trying to be pragmatic. These are short-term measures. There are medium and long-term measures that are in the books, but the reality is these events have been happening a lot. Even after the August event, like we talked about, it was a fall event, so we were doing what we can. Think about short-term solutions to protect property before more permanent solutions can be implemented. So that's things like keep proper runoff around your property. Clear debris from your gutters. Also, if you have a local drainage channel, If you see something in it, report that so that the community can come in and maintenance can clear that out, so it'll drain after events, so you're not gonna have ponding in your neighborhood and longer inundation. And, you know, hopefully, your neighborhood will not obviously be inundated, but the whole concept is to be prepared as possible with the resources that you have there. On that thought train, grade around your property, if you can, grade away from your property. And we'll get more into that too in terms of sandbagging and like potentially other berming around your property, but yeah, concept there. Do what you can, keep the water, get the water away from your property as fast as possible, so it drains away from your property. That's kind of the maintenance component. Then there's secure. I know a lot of you have done this already. You've seen it when we walk the river. I'm sure you all are sharing what you've learned and done with your neighbors in your community. And this is a picture that I took along the river of somebody who had a great, simple solution to elevate their utilities to basically provide some level of floodproofing. So the concept here is whatever you can do to get your utilities, appliances, tanks, equipment off the ground, you know, classic things we all have in Alaska in our garage are our chest freezers, right? Put your chest freezers on cinder blocks if you haven't already. Build a little wood platform for them to get them a little higher off the ground, so you give yourself a foot or 2 feet more factor of safety for a flood event. You know, anything that you can think of, doesn't have to be complicated. That's not the point here. You know, it's what can you do to protect your house in the simplest ways, protect your property, protect your appliances. Flood barriers. The Army Corps provides sandbags. I know that a lot of you have already received sandbags in the community. In line with that, you know, sandbags are basically building some sort of barrier around your property. There's a limited number that have been provided so far. So triage where you put them to the most important places. If you have, you know, the classic thing that I've seen around here and I've walked around is I've talked to residents who the vents in their crawl space were so close to being overtopped. If that's your low point, or the water is first going to intrude into your house, prioritize blocking off that vent with a little sandbag ring. Do the same thing around your garage door if that's the low point entrance. You know, we're Alaskans, we're all want to get in our equipment, do the work. You could build an earth berm around your property, leave an open part in front of the garage door, use your sandbags for that open part in your earth berm, so that you can use your garage door the rest of the year. And when you're looking at the resources that we talked about already, looking at the Mendenhall River gauge, looking at the Suicide Basin gauge, and you know an event is coming, you can put your, however many sandbags you have, your limited number of sandbags across your opening, close it off to that event. It's a pragmatic way to still have access to your property until the event's coming. The Army Corps does not endorse the commercial products that are out there. What I would suggest doing, you know, everyone is good now at getting on Google and researching. Get on Google, research these products, see what's worked for other people. Use products that have worked for others. Look at them. If you don't want to buy these products, look at how they're built. A lot of them are not that complicated. I know people in here are already building basically DIY versions of these flood walls, of these temporary barriers themselves using plywood and visqueen. That's another great option that you can implement yourself at relatively low cost and pretty fast. Doesn't have to look pretty. That's not the point. The point is just to get through until a temporary long-term solution comes along. Mobile homes, skirting. We want to use permeable skirting so that if you do have water intrusion, that water can then drain back out from underneath your home. Hopefully, like we talked about, the trend is towards bigger events. Recognize the reality of needing to anchor your mobile home if it's not anchored already. I did a quick Google looking at types of anchoring that are out there: deadmans, augers, drives, anchoring into concrete slabs. Look at how much anchoring is appropriate for your home just based on what Google says. You know, the goal here is just to have a solution in place. Doesn't need to be perfect. securing objects, and this isn't just relevant to mobile homes, this is relevant to everyone. Like, is mentioned higher up is tanks. You want it, boats, vehicles, anything in your yard that could move away, get disconnected, be damaged, could become a source of contamination during an event. Make sure that's secured. I worked in contaminated sites for a long time. A classic thing is these fuel tanks that have spilled and contaminated the soil, and then there's a plume that comes out from it. So do what you can do. So if you have indoor or outdoor fuel tank, secure it, have a shut-off valve so you can shut that off when you see an event coming through the weather service notifications, through the CBJ notifications, and through your own monitoring of the resources and websites that we've talked about. Bollards are another thing that are relevant to everyone. Basically, the concept there is just considering additional protection for your property. So if there is flowing debris through your neighborhood, you are protected from impact from that flowing debris. And like we talked about before, maintain drainage, keep that drainage positive away from your home, monitor for debris, clear drainage channels, report obstructions in drainage channels. All right, next, please. So a lot of these things that are relevant for outside your home are relevant for inside your home too. Take pictures, make copies of your valuable documents, property, scan them, upload them to the cloud, save a backup. So that if your electronics get swamped, you still have it on the cloud. I use Google Drive. There's obviously all sorts of resources out there, probably linked to your phone if you want to do it that way. And so that's twofold. Pictures of your valuable property, you have to make an insurance claim, you have them all there. And then if you have to evacuate your home, you have all the documents you need while you're away from your home, or if they're damaged during an event. Like we talked about outside, and like that picture along Mendenhall River, elevate anything you can that you are worried about being damaged by a flood event. That could be moving it to the second floor, that could be putting on cinder blocks, that could be putting it on a wood platform, that could be any other way of elevating it. You know, if you look at methods that other federal agencies suggest for dealing with these events, they include, you know, abandoning floors of your homes. The goal here is to do what we can to not have these really drastic solutions, like abandoning a house or abandoning a floor of your home. Okay, we talked about protect, we talked about elevate, we talked about you can install backwater valves so you're not getting backflow. I think that that's something that's been seen at some level in the neighborhoods, not from sewer, but from the storm drains flowing backwards. So that's something that people can do at an individual level, prevent backflow into their homes. I know a lot of people are already looking at and installing flood-resistant building materials, but you all have seen it. You install new drywall, flood comes through, and it happens all over again. There are commercial products out there that are either flood-resistant or flood-proof at some level. So you can look at replacing your drywall with a plastic or PVC that is not going to absorb the quantity of water that drywall is. Other solutions in line with that are going to be leave a gap at the bottom of your drywall or whatever. If you replace it with flood resistant material, leave a gap there so the water can drain back out if your home is inundated. Leave a gap halfway up the wall again, the water can get out after an event. Be able to take these panels. You use a non-drywall flood resistant plastic panel, be able to take it off, be able to pull out the insulation so it can dry rapidly after an event. I mean, obviously these are not the first choice, but these are pragmatic solutions to survive until a longer term solution comes along. Like we talked about, outside, inside, the same case for anchoring appliances, utilities, fuel tanks. That could be your chest freezer. We all have fuel tanks for our boats or whatever we use to live our lives here. We don't want those fuel tanks floating off, contaminating the world we live in that we care about. Use cam straps for strapping down your fuel tanks. or your chest freezer in your garage. In your basement, if you don't already have it, have a water alarm, have a sump pump. Check it every year, make sure it's working. When you see that the water is rising in Suicide Basin, check it again. Get a battery backup for your sump pump. And you can look at sealing the foundation and basement walls of your property. That's has pros and cons. Y'all, some of you know have experience with water coming up through the bottoms of your crawl spaces, but that is something you can consider. And that's kind of in line with what we were talking about removing drywall and replacing it, or other construction materials, replace them with more flood resistant materials.
Yeah. So the next section is about flooding and public health. Flooding causes contaminated drinking water, or can contaminate drinking water. Monitor boil water advisories. I used to live in the on the East Coast, and we used to have a bunch of these. I was informed by CBJ that they haven't had one in a while. And then watching out for spilled food, throwing out food that got wet or warm, and then the saying, when in doubt, throw it out. Staying away from floodwaters. They contain sewage, sharp objects, chemicals, and other drowning hazards like tree stumps and whatever else the water carries away. If your home gets flooded, dry it out as quickly as possible. If you can, within 24 to 48 hours. And then some mold growth if it doesn't dry out within that time. And then also while you're drying it out, keep the wet areas well ventilated. Throw away the wet materials. And then prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. Don't use generators inside or cook inside with charcoal stoves or propane. Or propane and uninsulated or unventilated areas. Thank you.
Yeah, so like we talked about before here, the goal with sandbags is to provide temporary protection and maximize the sandbags you have. So, as you can see, and I know walking around Mendenhall Valley, people are optimizing their sandbags. I've seen it in front of garages, in front of low points of homes. We talked about already, but that's what's going on there. You know, you see this person has a brick fence or whatever that is, a brick fence in front of their home, and they're sandbagging the low point entrance where the water is entering their property. Like talk about fence. That's the concept there. And garage doors and tying right into garage doors or a front door is you sandbag and then you put plastic behind the sandbag, put plastic in front of the sandbag, and then wrap it over the sandbags so that you can get the additional protection of the sandbags and the plastic above the sandbags, and then run the plastic as high as you can up your garage door or your front door or your vent or wherever you're putting that sandbag plastic combo so that you have additional protection over what the sandbags alone provide. So you can see that's what's going on here. They have in this picture, you have the plastic sheet wrapped around the sandbags and then up the door. The sandbags are providing some mass, and then the waterproofing itself is provided by the sandbags. All right, and we have a fun old school video on sandbag.
And real quick, so that Army Corps flood fighting techniques and booklet is going to be posted on the CBJ website for all of and all of the other material that we saw on the table for public consumption. So you guys can access it whenever, along with this presentation, and I'll pull up the video. It's a doozy.
In the major floods of the 1990s, the Seattle district of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers distributed 2.2 million sandbags to local communities. That's enough to stretch end on end from Seattle to Missoula, Montana.
During the flood of 1990 Thanksgiving, the water came up to here. Now, about 900 homes were damaged during that flood, and 2 men lost their lives. It seems people just don't realize how serious flooding can be. I know I've got to learn to prepare for flooding, so I can do something before it happens.
Sandbag construction is a centuries-old technique and it's changed little over the years. Where people power is still the proven method. Sandbags are used to prevent overtopping of levees, direct the river's current flow to specific areas, construct wind dikes around boils on levee back slopes and coves, to weigh down visqueen and straw beds, and to build supports on back slopes and on coves of saturated levees.
Sand is the best soil to use in the bags because it shapes so well. And when the sand is in the bags, they can pack together to keep the flood water out. Although a sandy soil is the most desirable for filling sandbags, any other available materials such as silt, clay, gravel, or a mixture of these may be used when necessary, or if they are the only ones available.
Save yourself time and energy by following some basic rules while filling sandbags.
Filling sandbags is normally a 2 or 3 person operation. Always wear gloves to protect your hands from the coarse filling material and the treated burlap bag. One team member should cross with feet apart and arms extended and place the bottom of the empty bag on the ground. Hold the bag open and form a 1.5 inch folded collar at the top. A second team member empties a fully rounded shell of material into the open end, filling the untied bag approximately 2/3 full. The third member.
So key point there, 2/3 full, not full all the way on sandbags.
Stockpiles of stacks. Remember to rotate duty between team members often to reduce muscle strain.
Learn proper sandbag placement procedure. This is very important. First, remove the debris from the area where the bags are placed. Place the 2/3 full bags lengthwise and parallel to the direction of flow, with the untied open end facing upstream. Fill those spots first. Start at the downstream end of the operation, about 1 foot landward from the dairy's edge, and continue upstream. Lower the open end of the bag under the filled portion. Place the succeeding bags tightly against and partially overlapping the previous one. Offset adjacent rolls or layers by 1/2 bag length to avoid continuous joints. Form a tight seal and compact and shape each bag by walking on it, and continue the same process as each layer is placed.
Therefore, when working the sandbag on a single stack, it is recommended not to go more than 3 sandbags high. It'll be 1, 2, 3, but there are exceptions to the stack. Higher single stack placement can be used effectively as a barricade to protect structures from high water damage. Single stack placement works well in flood areas where there is no stream flow velocity or danger from floating debris such as logs or tree stumps. Use the pyramid method of sandbag placement to increase the height of the levee and determine how high to raise the levee based upon an available flood forecast. This method increases the amount of bags needed to cover the area. Place the sandbag to form a pyramid by laying equal numbers of
So quick point there, that comment about basing it on the flood forecast. You all know how high the floods got on your property, a lot of you made marks. Use that as a starting point for how high to place your sandbag with the sandbag that you have. And if you don't have one, someone probably right around the neighborhood does.
Always on the bottom, as there are vertical layers. Use this rule of thumb when determining the dimensions of the pyramid. One bag equals about 1 foot. 2 bag widths equal about 2.5 feet, and 3 bags in height equal about 1 foot.
The sand oil created when water seeps through the foundation of a levee and transports material with it, which threatens the levee integrity. When rigging the sand boil, there should be a minimum of a 2 to 3 foot radius from the center of the boil to the inside edge of the ring pipe. Take care to contain the entire area within the ring pipe. Don't place sandbags directly on the boil. Pressure applied to plug the boil will cause water seeping through the levee to seek other avenues and could cause levee failure. A spillway section must be built to allow water to run over the ring dike in a controlled manner and divert overflow water away from the ring dike. And when the spillway water runs clear, the ring dike is completed.
Safety first. Use proper lifting techniques. Lift with your leg and bend at the knees to save wear and tear on your back. Always wear heavy work gloves when handling treated burlap sandbags. Dress in layers and wear reflective clothing so you're clearly visible at night. Watch out for heavy equipment unloading dirt or large rocks. Keep alert for front backup alarm. Use rubber gloves and appropriate clothing if contact with the water is unavoidable. In addition to this video on proper sandbag methods, make sure you study the Corps' latest brochure on proper procedures and safety tips on sandbagging techniques. For more information or questions about unique sandbag situations in your area, please call the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Emergency Management Branch at 206-764-3406.
So a few more comments on that video, sand boils. The focus of this presentation on what individual homeowners can do with their properties. At the time at which a HESCO barrier is installed, there will be a future presentation on the actual operation and maintenance of a HESCO barrier. But the general theory of sand boil is basically a difference in water elevation from the water side to the dry side of the HESCO barrier, and that drives flow under the HESCO barrier. Just so you're familiar with it, but there will be more on that at such time as this project, if the HESCO project moves forward. Another thing, safety. Everyone knows that, but you know, we all in Alaska, it's an unforgiving state. We all have friends, family, coworkers who have had accidents on the job, and it's really easy to get tunnel vision when you're working and when you're doing something you care about. Talk about heavy equipment, that is super important. Eye contact with the operator, high-vis clothing. Do not go in a tight space where you might get pinched between yourself and heavy equipment. Do not do something because you're trying to get a job done, even though, you know, this goes back to like rescue. You've got to always put the rescuer first, and that includes yourself. Do not put yourself in an unsafe situation just because you were trying to protect. You can't protect anything if you're injured. So I think that's really important for everyone to remember, is to look around, look out for everyone, and be aware of what's happening around you. I know listening to engineers is boring, so I was actually thinking, I was curious if anyone had any kind of key points that they saw in that video. Yeah, go ahead. We'll do a full question later, but go ahead.
I see tape used to hold the visqueen up in place.
Yeah.
Not just at points, or do you try to go around the perimeter of the visqueen so it creates a seal?
Yeah, absolutely, I can do. So, I know I'm getting with water, remind me your name,
The guy with the generator.
the guy with the generator, that's right, yeah, thank you for that picture, that's great. So what Mr. Generator was talking about there is basically what is the point of the tape? So the point of the tape in this diagram is to hold the Visqueen as high as possible to gain the extra water protection of the Visqueen above the sandbag, give yourself another 6 inches or a foot or whatever you have to work with. Above the sandbags.
It would seem to me that the water pressure would hold the visqueen up against the side.
Well, once it's there, but yeah, so that's a really good point. Once it's there, it'll hold it, but, you know, you gotta be ready when it comes and you should not be there doing it when the event is actually happening.
So going back to this diagram, so the brunt force of the water is gonna be absorbed by the bottom 2 layers of sandbags. And then the overtop is gonna be a lot less pressure, so that's where. So if there was gonna be an overtop, then it'll be a lot less pressure, and then it'll be covered by the visqueen in the back.
I have one more question. Carol, or you seem to put a lot of emphasis on making sure that the vents in your crawl space are covered. People like me who have garages with floor drains need to pay close attention to the floor drains, because that's where our flooding came from.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's also been, it could be anything.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So, you pointed out that I had previously mentioned quality events. That does not cover the full swath of, entrance points into the property. So like you had, that could also be like an event into your garage. So it is prioritizing the low point entrance, whatever it could be, whether it is a crawl space vent, garage vent, your garage door. In that case, it's the break in the brick wall. It could be a topographical low point in your yard if you are fortunate and already have some sort of natural dam or barrier in your yard. So thanks a lot for pointing that out. Okay, so no one wanted to say any key points. Dan, okay, thanks, Dan.
So on the slide, it said it had Seattle's number, that's not gonna help you. So our number, the Corps of Engineers, my desk number is 907-753-2871, that's Dan Aller. And I am emergency management, I am a civil planner, I am the one who you should call at the Corps of Engineers. Also, I think though, it's better if you call Denise's office, because she's local. I gotta fly from Anchorage to come down here, okay, I can answer your question on the phone, no problem, I can give you technical support, I can put you in charge, in touch with them. I can get you a lot of places, so I'm the central point of contact for the Corps of Engineers. But Denise would be the central point of contact, or her office would be the central point of contact here in Juneau. And I believe your number is 0800, right?
Yes, so I was gonna say a couple things, so, got an email address, so floodresponse@juno.org. That is, I think probably the best way to reach us, because we have multiple people who check that one email, address, so it's easier for us to get back. But my phone number is 907-586-0800. And that gets you to CBJ engineering.
Obviously, I call that more than I probably could. Because I knew it. Okay.
Thanks, Dan and Denise. We are definitely gonna do a question and answer after the presentation. So if this is like a sandbagging specific question. Okay,
Increase the whole, part for basically.
yeah, Keith.
I find Gorilla Tape works extremely well. And just
Big fat stuff.
big fat stuff. And one other thing for you is when it's raining, on this particular picture, you can see they only use little pieces of Gorilla Tape. I like to put Gorilla Tape all the way around the perimeter of the plastic so water can't get underneath it. And one of the really good techniques is if you take that Gorilla Tape and put it on the dashboard of your car and blast it with a defrost and heat it up, it gets real good and gooey, and that way it's gonna stick a lot better, because sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's wet, what have you. And so if you heat that Gorilla Tape up and go all the way around the perimeter of that plastic, and then do your sandbag, that therefore helps you prevent seepage. And one other small point is we can experiment that picture on the left, there's a bunch of grit. And a lot of times it's hard to get the Gorilla Tape and plastic to seal to those grout lines.
Sure.
And so I've been doing a bunch of experimenting with just Play-Doh, and Play-Doh is amazing. If you guys ever have like a leak in a grout line, or a leak coming through maybe your window or your door or whatever, I would suggest going to the store, getting clay or just Play-Doh. Because Play-Doh does a really, really good job of sealing up those really hard, grout lines, cracks, what have you. Just FYI.
So does that Gorilla Tape ruin your?
It'll take the paint off, sure will. Yeah. Yeah. And dare I say, if you heat it up and you take it off, you might be able to get it off without doing the paint up. I know that there's that flex tape, Mr. Bill Swift, I think, say, that'll peel all your sand. So, it works. Yeah, it really makes it friendly.
Okay, one more sandbag before the Q and A question, not sandbag question. Okay, go ahead.
So how confident are you in these applications in our specific locale? We have high groundwater, high permeability soils, and most of our homes are perimeter foundations. So if we make these bunker-like sandbag features around our homes and they fill from underneath anyway, how likely are we to be successful using these techniques?
Okay, that's a great question. So to restate the question is, how confident are we in these techniques, given the specific challenges of Juneau with high permeability soil and high groundwater, like y'all have seen during the events, the groundwater coming up into crawl spaces. And that is exactly why this is a multi-pronged approach. If you are one of those people that is seeing the intrusion coming through your crawl space, inundating your home, sandbag solution is probably not the solution for you, and you should be focusing on the other solutions we've talked about, raising your appliances, utilities, anything of value, securing them. Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and things like point that out is really, and that's what's really interesting about these short-term solutions as opposed to a long-term solution, is it's doing the best we can with what we have, which is limited information and time, and it is going to be different for every homeowner. Yeah, so you ready to go on?
Thank you, Michael. So the next part of our presentation is a short presentation by Scott Mendenhall. With FEMA on a national flood insurance program.
Thanks. You have my slides on?
Yes.
Thanks. So when we're talking about immediate action we do now, the short amount of time we have before we anticipate the next flood, and I feel to not overlook financial preparation. You're gonna suffer some losses if we have another flood that we get now, so ensuring that loss, I think is very important, unless of course you already have enough cash in your bank account, you don't worry about it, so. It doesn't apply to me, I have insurance, so, but I want to cover some basic myths and facts to make everybody understand your eligibility and what it pays for, what it does not pay for. It is some common myths and facts I hear all the time. First of all, it doesn't matter what flood zone you live in, you can buy flood insurance from the National Flood Insurance Program. The only prerequisite is that your city or county or borough, your jurisdiction you live in, must be a participating member of the National Flood Insurance Program. And the county, the city and boroughs do participate in NFIP, so as long as you live in this jurisdiction, you can buy flood insurance from FEMA. There are a lot of jurisdictions across Alaska that do not participate, you do not sell insurance there, but no problem for any of you that are here. I often hear that I don't need flood insurance, I got really good homeowners, it covers everything. You all know that already, okay. Unfortunately, some of us learned it the hard way. I don't need flood insurance but it says I get disaster aid from FEMA. Now, many of you have applied for disaster aid from FEMA, and you've probably learned that FEMA disaster assistance isn't designed to restore your house back to the way it was, right? Some of those commercials you might be used to on television with various insurance companies. You know, we're gonna return you back to the way you were before, you know, your catastrophe, whatever it was. That's what insurance does. Disaster assistance is meant to give you a helping hand, get you started, get you going in the right direction, get your home, you know, safe, sanitary, and secure, not to replace every single thing you lost. That's what insurance does. Disaster assistance, you know, helps, get people started who did not have insurance. And also, disaster assistance can fill some of the gaps that insurance doesn't cover. Like flood insurance covers damage to, you know, just your home. But it does not cover things like, temporary housing, or some of your temporary needs you have, some of our disaster assistance programs are designed to do. Give you some funding for, you know, temporary, you know, food, medications, clothing, whatever you might need. And also, if, say your home's not livable for a few weeks while it's being repaired, flood insurance doesn't pay for your temporary housing, but disaster assistance does. We do provide some temporary housing assistance. So they're designed to work hand in hand, work together. Next slide, please. So here's some things that it generally covers. Flood insurance is designed to cover your home, not your yard, not your landscaping, not your hot tub, swimming pool, no vehicles. It's damage to the home itself. So here's just some things that generally are covered and are not. So, you know, your detached garage does have some limited coverage. It's 10% of whatever the coverage is for the house. It's not complete total coverage. If you have a very valuable outbuilding that's worth more than 10% of the value, 10% of the full coverage you have for flood insurance, which is $250,000 is the maximum, you might want to get a separate flood insurance policy for that building. So if you have a big shop building like I wish I had right now, that's worth as much as my house, I'll have a separate policy for each building. No, I don't have that building yet, but we can dream, right? So you see what's generally excluded, that temporary living expenses, that's where the disaster aid comes in. Decks, hot tubs, other things that are stored outside the building is not covered. Next slide, please. Here's what flood insurance covers as far as limits. It's $250,000 for your residential building, $100,000 for contents. If you have a commercial building or a non-residential building, it's $500 and $500. And so what it covers is just flooding. That's the only kind of hazard. This is a single peril policy. It's just flooding, nothing else. And our definition of a flood is important with any insurance policy. We read the definitions and understand what defines the event that triggers payment. So for the NFIP, we define flood as a temporary condition of overland flooding that inundates 2 or more acres of land or 2 or more properties, one of which is yours. So if you and your neighbor got flooded, that's a flood. NFIP insurance pays off. So you might be wondering, well, how much does flood insurance cost? Well, the good news here in Alaska, you have the lowest average cost of flood insurance in the nation. The average cost in Alaska is around $450 a year. Lower 48, it's about double that. I helped a number of you in the last few days with your flood insurance, helped a few of you actually purchase a policy. And I'm really, personally, I was shocked how low the cost is here. You know, I need to work mostly in the lower 48 when it comes to buying insurance. So you do have some pretty reasonable costs, especially compared to what the damages are. I'm sure many of you have some good stories and give us some good feedback on what does it cost to fix your house after you've had a flood of water. It's significant cost. And so that $500 a year compared to what you just spent to fix that, it seems like a really good deal. Now, FEMA is not the only insurance company in town. There are private companies out there that are selling private policies. I'm a big believer in consumer choice. If you have an insurance agent offers you a couple different ones, certainly do some comparison shopping, but be sure you read the policy and you understand that, do a true comparison, understand the definitions, understand the limitations. But there are private insurance companies out there as well. So find the policy that works best for you. I guess a couple of important differences between the NFIP and private insurance is the NFIP will not cancel you because you filed a claim. And we will not double your rates because you filed a claim, because we can. Congress regulates the National Flood Insurance Program. Most private policies are not regulated by anybody. So they can set whatever conditions they want. That's why I say when you do comparison shopping, please read the policy before you buy it. When you're, well, even ours, our policies are online. Please read them, understand what it is you're purchasing before you do so. If you have any questions, we're gonna be in town for a while. Please contact us at any time. We're right over at the library most every day. We'll wait, Q&A coming later. Okay, thank you very much.
So that concludes our presentation on homeowner, protection, for flood events. If you have, now I guess we can do Q&A. If you guys have any questions, Dan will run around, so you can speak into the mic.
You guys have extra one. That in your agenda.
Okay, so that's the question.
It's on your agenda to cover Hisco barriers. I thought I saw that.
Not tonight, but you can ask what, the subject matter expert, Keith is sitting right here, so he can answer your question. Okay, so we posted stuff online about the HESCO barriers. Is it on CDJ's flood fight website? Where?
Gino.org, correct?
Not Gino.org, we posted, so that there's some technical information, it's a one pager, tells you exactly how big it is, or how large it is, how it's designed, and so forth. But I'm gonna let Keith give you a one over the world on how good these things are and how rapidly they come in.
All right, super. Cool. Take care of it.
All right, guys, my name is Keith Anderson. I was called out here just to discuss HESCO. I was the first employee that was running when they started. I worked for them for about 17.5 years before going out on my own. I've been doing flood since 2003. I've literally built hundreds of miles of this product. So basically, this is kind of like, this is a small mini model. There's obviously a 4 foot tall, 3 foot wide, 16 foot long, one kind of hard to carry on. So basically, the neat thing about HESCO, which is also cool for Alaska, is because it comes flat pack. So I mean, shipping to Alaska is a pain, it's expensive. And so anyway, yeah, you get a mile of it on your truck. So with these, basically, all you do is you stretch them out and you join these little helical coils together, and then you'll take a joining rod. You just take a joining rod right down the coils, like so, and therefore that allows you to make that instant connection. So the nice thing about HESCO is once you connect them, it can modify, it can tailor itself to the grain. All right, so they can go left, right, they can undulate up and down, and basically just stretch it out like infinitely as much as you want. One of the ways that I like to see a HESCO or refer to a HESCO is it's kind of like a Lego, like a soil-filled building block. So in this case, there's four, there's two, this is a 2-cell section, but you can easily separate any 2 cells. Based on whatever the requirement is. And then additionally, you can stack them, about as high as really you want. I stacked them upwards of 30 feet high before. I know that last year I did about a 20-foot high flood wall in California around a 2-acre lake. I was getting ready to flood. So as far as flood barriers are concerned, I own a flood barrier provider. I've got a company, I've got over a dozen different flood barriers. And so predominantly that's so that I can tell people, hey, look, this barrier isn't gonna work for you. You know, I'm not here to sell you something that you don't want, because I already represent it. If you want it, great, but this barrier over here is better for you. And so I say that specifically with HESCO, specific to your guys' situation, is that, I mean, honestly, HESCO, it is the bear of flood area. As far as if there's flooding and if there's dangerous flows, bad terrain, if you have every single bad problem you can think about with a flood barrier, then frankly, that's why the Corps of Engineers uses the HESCO barrier. Because it basically has that mass to stop the water, and it's neat that you can cut and tailor it and basically modify it, to suit pretty much any situation that you're gonna be in. And so I'm not sure, I know that I did do a briefing the other day, I don't know how many of you guys saw it or I talked, I know there was questions and concern about what happens if debris impacts on the head, what happens if a tree smashes into it? You know, and I know that, I think there's a video online where it talks a lot about the, explosive blast testing, the crash testing, and basically a lot of this product, 90% of most military bases downrange are surrounded by it as a blast wall. It's a soil filled basket that you can, normally they're about 12 feet tall, and they'll eat a car bomb for lunch. Or a runaway truck, or, in case of a flood, a floating tree ball root or what have you. So, at that, I mean, this is just again, so that you guys kind of see what it looks like. Again, it's a small one, the ones that we're looking at here, they're 4 feet tall, and in some cases, they're gonna be stacked multiple levels high. So outside of that, and as far as the HESCO is concerned, anybody have any specific questions reference to this product? Maybe first.
If your ground's not level.
So if the ground's not level, okay, so you can go lengthwise and you can contour all day long, that's not a problem. And so that level, no problem. But you wanna keep it level side to side, right? So basically, the barriers that we're looking at here, they're 3 foot wide. And then long, however long you stretch them. So basically, you want that ground footprint space roughly, 3 foot wide or more if you're stacking them higher, but you want it level side to side. Lengthwise is the.
What's the film here?
So generally, normally just sand. Sand is, I like sand with some fines in it, because that way if the water goes through, those fines do a really good job to clog it up. I've seen people throw with just about everything. I mean, I've seen dirt, I've seen rock, sand, gravel, you name it. Gravel is porous, so frankly, I don't like gravel. But the neat thing is this fabric, even though the fabric is a porous fabric, but during a flood event, usually after about the first 2 hours, that seepage curve goes way down, and that's if you open plastic. A lot of times, the cores, what they like to do, in many cases, is they'll put a visqueen under about the bottom 6 inches, and then just wrap it up and over, and that therefore gives you an impermeable layer in front of the HESCO that'll prevent water from seeping through. And I'm kind of getting a little bit long-winded on here. So sand is the best. If there is any seepage that goes through the barrier, again, after about 2 hours, all this fabric clogs up with soot and just gunk that's in the water. But if you don't want any seepage, then you just simply put 6 millimeter plastic underneath it and then just wrap it up and over.
Weight of that material is gonna stop.
Say again?
Weight of that material is gonna stop.
Correct. Yeah, it's the weight of the dirt itself. Yeah. We've done, I don't know if you guys saw the video, I mean, I did show a number of videos where we had, because there's a lot of questions about saying, hey, if a tree hits this, is it gonna rip down this whole entire line? And so I guess with the video that was posted online from the other day when we did a meeting, but I did talk a lot about, I mean, we've blown it up with literally hundreds of pounds of fertilizer bombs, which has the best pushing power of any explosive. So I mean, if you're gonna move a building next town over, you want a fertilizer bomb, because it's good push really and blows things up, you push it. And so we've tested this a lot with the HESCO where, I can give you examples of it online. But basically every blast test or crash test, we crashed a 6.8 ton truck at 51 miles an hour into one of these, a 2-1 configuration, and stopped with it. It stopped dead in its tracks. And so whether it be an overwhelming blast, or a runaway truck, or maybe an engine block, they got blown out of a car and smashed into the Hesco, whatever. Every threat that we've ever seen, there's been times I remember cases where we tried to blow a hole in it. We wanted to blow a hole in it just to see what happened. And so, for example, if this was a Hesco and there was an explosive right here, in the cases where we've blown a hole in it, it literally only blew up the area right in front of the overwhelming charge. And the boxes on either side didn't really move at all. And so it's just a really good way to illustrate it. If you have a big tree smashed into your Hesco, that we've never seen anything tear over a whole line of Hesco in anger, I guess, if you will. We never had, an overwhelming blast, a crazy suicidal driver, or a tree, we've never had seen that happen.
And Keith, let me just add a couple things onto that. In reference to debris, the HESCOs are tested against direct impacts from trees, in addition to these like far more massive events, like you're talking about in military applications. They are tested against logs impacting them, and they have been used in New Mexico recently to contain and stop flood debris in wildfire areas. And then, like you talked about, the great thing about them being cellular is if there is damage to a single cell, that single cell can then be repaired. And so what is advantageous in some ways with these events is their short duration. So as opposed to in the lower 48 where there have been failures in HESCOs and the duration of these events lasts for a longer time. So after an event, if there is damage, they can be repaired before the next event. We're also looking at designing them so there are multiple units, and have it lengthwise, but also multiple units thick, for particularly high velocity areas like 1 kilowatt where the water is pointed directly at the bank.
These are supposed to be representing a 3x3x4. Can you get it in this size?
No, unfortunately not. The smallest size there is a 2x2. You think those? 2x2, we got the 2x2. Yeah.
2x2?
The smallest one is 2 foot by 2 foot by, there's a 4 foot long option, a 10 foot long option. Price per linear foot goes to 10 foot, it's just cheaper if you just split them if you have to. But yeah, the smallest one is 2 feet square. Yeah.
And that's 2 foot high too.
2 foot high, 2 foot wide, yeah, correct. And then, there's one that's 4 foot long and it's like, but they're 2 foot. And hey, one of the things, oh, sorry, Ron.
Keith, I know you keep talking about how impermeable they are to any type of explosive. Have you put an explosive charge at the base of these things when they've been in a river and tested how they respond to erosion? Especially because a lot of the area along the river is going to require them to be too high. If the river starts eroding material out of the baskets and the top there tips over, what then?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, first, answer, no, I never, I know the ballistic water would probably suppress an explosive more.
No, it would tamp it, but it's fine, I think you're asking more of a question. If when we put these in, it's part of the answer, right? It's going to be revetted and armored on the bank to prevent the erosion that you're speaking of, to prevent that from falling in. That's part of the project, and the CDJ will be handling that. Right, yes. That's part of the HESCO barrier, is not gonna have a problem with erosion.
And the true question is not just for the penetration and knocking the barriers out of place, it's also for what happens if a tree hits that, gets lodged into the metal cage, and then pulls it away.
Then it'll pull off that panel. If it goes, like, if it jabs itself in here, like, let's say it's floating, and then it jabs itself, and then somehow that wall starts floating, and then eventually comes to tear this panel over, it could, I haven't seen it, but it very well could tear the panel open. I've never seen anything tear a panel off. And so one of the comments on that is, okay, hypothetically, this panel did get torn open. Chances are that we've never seen anything go through and compromise the panel on both sides. And so if this panel gets open, then there's naturally water going to go in and it's going to swirl around. But you could bet that it's still probably going to stay way more than half of the dirt inside, just because of
You know, I mean, you literally have to open that thing all the way to the bottom, and then you're exposed to all of this dirt. You know, and then, but once that water comes and starts swirling around, chances are that it's not gonna be able to completely empty that well, so that well is still going to have mass inside of it. And then additionally, because it's a modular option, you know, if this dam gets damaged, or maybe there's two cells that get damaged, it's nice that they're all modular, so your damage is gonna be very isolated specifically to this point, to the point of impact of where the damage took place.
It's hard for me to conceptualize that when we've watched 100-foot plus trees break down the river and how it can only potentially tear out one family. And I recognize you're saying the tree won't go all the way through. I totally agree. You know, you've shown us that data, but the erosion factor, when we watch, 50+ feet of yardage just disappear, pulling trees out with it. How are these gonna withstand that erosion?
Yeah, that's, erosion, I mean, obviously they're doing the armoring. And so I agree, erosion, I am a flood barrier specialist, and I can build a barrier to stop water. The ground you're putting it on, if it's erosive, then it is wise and suggested to take measures to prevent that scouring or erosion from taking place. You know, I do find that, anywhere you go, you have lots of good vegetation on the hillside, and you got pretty much everything you have, it seems to be rock armored already against that scouring. But one of the things I also want to comment on is, as we were talking about with those buses, let's say we're going all the way to lengthwise. And then let's say you have an area that I think is gonna scour right there, that's loose dirt, that's a problem, I don't like that spot. And so one of the things he was commenting on is, as we go lengthwise, sometimes I'll just take a couple of cells and then just butt them in like this at a 90-degree angle. And so it's nice, because as it goes all the way down, if you happen to have water that actually starts to scour under here, I would comment that the flats under here are about 4 inches bigger, and that helps to basically contain that dirt, because scouring, we are aware of scouring. And so that does a good job to help contain the scouring. I have seen a head coach scour before, where it was the first project I ever did, never had a clue what I was doing, and I was out there with someone else, and I was over the expert. And, he built it on a curve on top of sand, a very sandy surface, and we didn't heat it in at all. And so I'm sure that you can imagine that water hits that curve, right? And it's kind of in like the curve as it's coming around, and it did scour out part of the head though. But the neat thing was, all the dirt just kind of went out, scoured out the bottom. But because it was connected for, a mile in that direction, and then also a mile in that direction, all of that water still held. There was not a single well failure. And so even though technically in this particular case, the only time I've ever had it happen, is that the wire itself still actually held, and even though water was able to go through to the other side, because everything was connected on both sides, basically it prevented any further scouring of that hillside in this particular location. But, it's scouring definitely, if you see the potential for scouring, and we suggest you to heat it in a little bit. You can use some sort of fabrics to protect the hillside, some sort of anti-erosion method.
Let me add some points to that. So I'm glad you brought that up, and that's obviously something the Army Corps and CDJ is aware of, concerned about. You all have seen it. Like Dan said, part of this project is, if it goes ahead, the entire bank will be armored, which I know is not a complete solution, like you highlighted. But then the other thing, there are other pieces to it, like all these things are more multi-pronged solutions, is on Philwick especially, where that's the point is straight at the bank, pulling the ESCO barrier as far back from the bank as possible, so there's the most room for dissipation of energy, and like one of the giants of the fruit that you were talking about. And then one other thing there is, obviously there is some vegetation along here, but this is a huge alluvial river, and there are sections that are sand, gravel, as you all know. And so in those areas, what we're looking at doing is basically pushing chop rock into the ground in those areas, to provide a level of more robust base for the ESCO barriers where there's that really weak material.
Is this representative of the age of wire fabric There's this locked up as well.
It's the exact fabric.
So the question was, is this representative of the gauge of fabric? Excuse me. It is, yeah.
Yeah, so this is the exact gauge, this is the exact wire and the exact fabric of the material that's used.
So let's suppose we do this. 8 years goes by and it's time to take this out. What am I left?
Pile of dirt. There's two ways you can take it out. There's a lifting beam, which is, and that's another thing, if you guys ever go onto our website, like, if you go to floodprotection.com, I did a news thing called how to modify a HESCO barrier. I do, a lot of times I modify stuff because I have to. And so, repeat your question again, I'm sorry. Thank you. So basically, the Corps of Engineers has a lifting beam. I also have one. It's basically, it's like a train, it's just a big steel I-beam that has spreader bars that goes over the side like this. And so basically, you put the spreader bar, the beam over the HESCO, there's clamps that clamp onto it, and then you just pick it up, and then all the dirt just falls out the bottom. And, by the way, just a random for you, it's very popular to then reuse them for shooting ranges. Do you guys have any shooting ranges or whatnot? It's super popular.
I mean, as much as I'd like to shoot at them, I have another question.
Okay.
One second, CJ, do you want to comment on what would happen at the end of the project when they are removed?
Well, the removal will be part of the overall project. I mean, that's part of the total project.
So if anyone didn't hear that, at the end of the project, the removal is part of the project. Once a long-term solution is implemented, all right, go ahead.
That's not an expense the homeowner.
My question is about, piping and sand oils related to the barriers. In the city's proposal, we're talking about placing these within 4 feet of structures that have a perimeter foundation, possibly 3 foot of crawl space. What happens?
Well, okay, now piping, once you get piping, then you're now under the ground, which is outside of, piping, I'm aware of it, and I've done a lot of projects actually where piping is a big problem. I was commenting earlier in South Carolina, you know, in Charleston, they have problems with the rivers over there, and watch piping into this guy's basement, like 10 houses down the road. I mean, a couple things, the piping, if you have a crawl space in your basement, maybe it's worth looking. There's people that put like a really heavy duty rubber, that's what I know in the south, that's what they're doing for a lot of these crawl spaces because it's a problem out there. And so what they'll do is they'll put a rubber membrane down on the bottom of their crawl space in their house. And they do some methods to kind of seal it, maybe weigh it down, so that's a good way to prevent that water from being able to boil up in the bottom of your house. You know, as far as piping is concerned, I mean, you know, you don't know it until you see it. And I mean, I don't have a very good answer for that.
Well, let me add on to that then. We all know that the soils along Mendenhall are sandy, alluvial. Generally, piping happens over a long-term period. That is one advantage of this unique flood event is that it's fast in terms of how long until it passes. So that will reduce the time that sand oils, that's what your sand oils can form. Go ahead.
Are you familiar with any other examples where the barriers have been used for a decade or more as a primary?
Yeah. Louisiana, it has to be a temporary barrier that people oftentimes just don't move. And so bluntly speaking, I mean, it's all over, but I know I can go find a number of projects, specifically in Louisiana, that date back to about 2004, 2005, that are still in place. And they're actually doing really well. Just to real quick on the design line, just to throw it out there, and as Dan mentioned, ESCO has a design line. They're claiming a design line. They say 5 years in a harsh environment. I again spent 6 years in Afghanistan. I traveled over 30 countries building this product in a ton of horrible UV environments. It is my opinion that in a super harsh UV environment, roughly between 8 to 10 years you're gonna start to get a couple stress hairs right underneath these, this staple line. Because that dirt that's in here, it's basically pulling down on the fabric as it actually says inside. And so this fabric basically is just, it's pulled up over the top and it's stable right here. It's essentially just hanging in the bag. And so again, roughly around 8 to 10 year mark, you'll see some minor stress hairs right here. And that's in a harsh heating environment. The ones in Louisiana, they aren't even, I mean, they still, there's no stress hairs in them whatsoever. And you can also take steps to make them last much longer, but I understand that we're here on a temporary application, so I don't want. It's on that website, you know, how to modify a HESCO barrier. I did talk about taking steps that you can make it last longer. But here in your guys' view of the environment, I mean, I have every expectation that the last upwards of 10 to 15 plus years. But I must say, the manufacturer does say 5 years environment. That way, if something happens in like 7 years, no one's gonna pay, please replace 10 miles on my HESCO. You know, so anyway, does that answer your question? Okay, well, I can try again, but.
And I know we already said this, but the cellular design means that if there is damage or repair, digital sections can go in there and be repaired. And that is part of the design of this is making, ordering enough HESCO, including that the O&M, so those sections can be repaired if there is damage over the multiple years of this solution is being looked at.
And if I can talk about real quick to repair, it takes about 10 to 20 minutes to repair. And so let's just say you do have a tree that comes and smashes into the cell right here, jacks it all up. All right, this is a broken cell. Because all you have to do is go to a new unit, unscrew the coil, take off just this panel, and then basically you put it, mash it right over the panel that's busted, and then you screw the coils right into place. So basically, I mean, if something busts, it's just simple to overlap it with a brand new piece of wire, and then just recoil it, and it's, I mean, then you won't even know it's broken to begin with.
This might be a better question for, the city manager, but is the HESCO barriers we're getting, is the steel on them galvanized or not galvanized? Because that has a lot to do with how long it's gonna last.
That's better than galvanized. Zinc and aluminum is a galvanized process, so basically it does outlast standard galvanization, it is galvanized.
And that is what we're getting in Juneau.
Correct. Yeah, they're not, they're always galvanized, all of them are galvanized.
Go ahead.
Hey, do we have a status on the city's plans for the HESCO barrier? The reason I ask is I've heard people say if we put them in like 3 times.
All right, so, the HESCO barriers are, this is something that's been discussed with the assembly. And, specifically what's being talked about now is how the community is going to pay for the site prep and the installation. That goes back to, what Dan.
I'm up there.
He's behind me. What Dan had said when he was talking about the first or second slide. So the Army Corps, will provide these, HESCO barriers to us and the shipping for the HESCO barriers. At no cost to Juneau, but Juneau has to pay for the site prep and the installation of these barriers. So part of the discussion that's happening that started at the last, actually started back at the October 21st public meeting. It'll be discussed again at November 18th at the assembly meeting. Is the discussion about how to pay for the installation and that site prep. If the community essentially doesn't want to pay for an installation and site prep, then you wouldn't order the HESCO barrier.
They're as easy as Scott says, but we use volunteer labor to put them together.
And one of the things that we thought about is the cost is not really, I mean, putting these together, we believe is going to be the smaller portion of the cost. So it's the site prep that's going to be the vast majority of the cost. Some of the armoring for some of the properties, making a path onto the properties to lay these HESCO barriers down, making sure the HESCO barriers are on a flat surface. I think once that's really gonna be probably 90% of the cost, actually, filling up, standing up those barriers and filling them with sand is gonna be the, probably the cheaper part, and most likely we wind up using, our police department for that labor, but that's probably the best answer at the moment.
Way in the back.
Take this on with the cost of this, not even known, and we're talking about maybe $10 million.
And once again, I can't fully answer this question because this is a community question that ultimately, the city manager will make a recommendation to the assembly, and the assembly will be weighing in on all these decisions that involve money, because they have the power of the purse string. But we are estimating that, the HESCO barrier, so phase one, which is, from Marion down to Riverport, is probably about $7.5 million. It's, so that is part of the discussion. But I also want to sort of phrase that and sort of counter that with, when we initially went to the Army Corps of Engineers, because they are the experts in dealing with floods all around the country, we were first focused on the long-term mitigation. And that is like all the ideas that people have about everything from permanent levees to dams to bombing the glacier to tunneling to all of those long-term mitigations that are meant to stay in place for decades and decades and decades. And that was where we started the conversation. And when we did that, and the more that we learned about that process, that's what our assembly has already started in terms of, we requested a general investigation study with Army Corps. Our assembly has ring fenced $3 million to assist with that, that study. The Forest Service has offered $1 million to help with the study, which is really, really great. But all of those processes take a really, really long time. And we knew that the public was going to say, well, and when I say long time, they're saying like 7 to 10 years is the process of doing the studying and the permitting and the construction. And we knew the community, or lots of people in the community would say, well, I can't wait for 10 years. What can I do? What can I do now? And what you could do really, really short term now is what the Army Corps, and I asked the Army Corps to address with you all today. But we asked, okay, what beyond what, sandbagging at your own home and could you do? And they referred us to the Army Corps flood fighting unit. They have a center of excellence. This is their recommendation for us for the shorter term project. So I think that we're thinking about this. I think it's HESCO barriers for very short term. We don't have another very short term option. So that was what the Army Corps has recommended as the best short term option.
These say short. How quick could this be? All right, okay, so I don't think the community agrees we need it, and we'll find a way to pay.
So our estimated time frame is probably starting construction in like a February to March of 2025 time frame, and that's versus the long-term general investigation study that's the 10-year alternative.
One thing that I was just to add on to what Denise said, is she highlighted is kind of short, long term, there's also an intermediate. And that's what we've been talking about this whole time, is this like multi-pronged approach. So there's these short-term solutions, which are protecting our own home, HESCO barriers, which are short-term in terms of being able to implement them rapidly, but then they will then provide protection for over 5 years. And then there's the intermediate steps we're being taken, which are updated hydraulic modeling for the Mendenhall River. The reason that has to be updated is because as highlighted here, the river's changed, the bottom of the river's changed. Flood events that are bigger than anyone ever conceived would happen are happening. So that's the intermediate steps. And then, like you said, there's this long-term step, this Army Corps, and long-term solution, general investigation. You have to ask a question already. Is anyone else have a question first? I saw your hand first, Red Hat.
Yeah, so, my question is in relation to, are there any resources that can help us determine the likelihood or the areas of inundation? Let's say we build some of these DIY, barriers, or we put barriers around our own homes, or sandbagging. Yeah, are there any resources to assess the earth that's underneath our barriers and how far we can gain from the house to avoid inundation to undermine our foundation? Does that make sense, the question?
Are you talking about like protecting your own home, or are you talking about the HESCO barrier?
No, protecting our own home.
Okay,
HESCO barriers are beyond.
all right. Let me restate the question, and you let me know if I got the gist of it. So the question is, are there any resources that individuals can take to correctly design or prepare the flood fighting on a home scale? Is that generally the idea?
Yeah,
Okay.
mostly in regards to like undermining the barrier, our own barriers around our home.
Okay, great. So it's a good question, and that is really kind of, the answer to that is really in line with the answers to a lot of these solutions that we need to use the resources we have at this time. So that's, I would start by looking at high water marks in your neighborhood. If you don't have any, see if your neighbors have any. The Weather Service has a whole collection of high water marks that they collect to go to the event, and that will at least, will answer your question, but that will at least give you a start. But if you, decide, okay, I want to protect my home from a 16-foot event, from as big as this event, the last record event, or you decide, you know what, I see that there's a trend, I want to go 17 feet. Use those high water marks as a starting point. I think you do it, and that's what's interesting about the solution, is it's going to be a lot of like, what's working right now, what worked for the last event. If you experience a lot of velocity in the water through your neighborhood, don't make your sandbags one row thick. Use a pyramid shape for your sandbags if you were worried. It just, I walk around these neighborhoods and like, you can see, as everyone knows, there are foundations that are undermined. If that's something that's happening around your home, use a pyramid shape for the sandbags instead of just a single wall for the sandbags. Steve, you've been here now for a while.
Thanks. Regarding the 3-foot HESCO barrier that gets the 2-cell, for costs and for hypothetically homeowners that want to make a barrier instead of sandbag, I know it's probably way too much, but hypothetically, how much would it be for a 2-cell unit per unit cost, and then a separate, shipping cost per unit? And someone would probably need, 100 of these to go around their whole house.
Understood. So like, I know that the 4-foot one is coming in like $36 a foot. I think that the 2-foot one is not gonna come out around 20 some odd bucks a foot. If you guys want, I have if you want to email me at keith.anderson@flooddefensegroup.com, or you just look at Flood Defense Group. I can send you a price list that has all of our HESCO, and it also has like 20 other different flood prevention products, and it's all broken down into cost per linear foot. So it's kind of easy to look and say, oh, okay, cost per foot. It's a ton of research. It's already done on the website.
Your website is down this.
Flood Defense Group. Yeah. And by the way, on the do-it-yourself flood defense, one of the things, and I don't want to go too far outside of my lane here, but I created my own flood barrier test station to start testing my own DIY ideas, because people call me when it's too late. They're like, oh my God, I'm flooding, the water's at the door, it's too late. Or they just don't have the money, because fair enough, it's expensive to wrap your house with a flood barrier. So if you guys just ever want to go to YouTube and just go DIY flood barrier and flood defense group, I have examples of where, I'm using, all sorts of stuff, locally available resources, whether it be, fencing or pallets or hay bales, or I've done a whole bunch of variety of options of how you can protect yourself. The one I did was shipping pallets, which I was showing the guys earlier. Hey, it's not like It's a DIY idea, put it that way. But it's not 40 inches of water and it was $5.50 a foot. So, I mean, you know, there's a thing, which, you know, again, I'm not trying to like go sell DIY ideas, but I mean, look, I appreciate it. If you guys are out here and you're like, oh my God, what can I do? That's some great resources that you go and look at that. And also, by the way, if you guys ever call and say, hey, I'm gonna flood on my any flood failures, what do you think I should do? I'm really good at helping. And so just throw it out there, I think you guys don't have a good timeline. I mean, the flood water's coming, it's been global already. But anyway, call me, I'm really good at helping with that.
All right, right there. Yeah. The question is there gonna be any extensive testing of soil under the barriers? So this kind of goes back to this issue. We're trying to implement a shorter term solution, recognizing that it is not a permanent solution. Get it in a realistic amount of time. So the soil testing will be based on the field engineer, the Army Corps, and the CDJ have been, as you've probably seen, walking the bank back and forth, looking at conditions that are seen there, looking at locations where scour is occurring, looking at soil types in situ. And based on what the team is seeing, that is how we make our assessment of the quality of the soil along the way that has to go.
What's happened now? So when the flooding occurred, the sinkhole started.
Okay, we walked it. Okay, thanks for your feedback. So the comment there is that it is ongoing after the flood.
It's caused by the flood, not being rapid, through rocks, whatever, but it is causing. And I think it's in that.
Yeah. Yeah, so we walked the reach several times, and we observed what we're describing and, you know, steps that we're going to take to mitigate that are compacting shot rock in areas of weak soil. Okay, mass. Not anymore, yeah, unmasked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold on, let me bring you the.
Can the riverbed be scooped up and use that sand to fill the Hesco bags? Back up to where it comes from?
Physically, it is possible to scoop up the riverbed sand to use it, but that opens up a whole other can of worms with working in a river channel. So that is more expensive and slower because of the environmental, permitting associated with that than using an established tool. Okay, fine. No, I'm sorry. Here's Harrison.
And this might be a question for Denise.
When will the updated inundation map be available for the 15, 17, 18, 19, 20, etc.?
Hello, this is Nate. I'm the Deputy Director of Engineering for the City of Borough of June. He recently contracted with a group called Michael Baker International to start that process. And it's going to be a multi-step process. Right now, we're trying to make sure that we can give them as much information as possible. Pre-existing modeling that exists, all of the information and data that we know, including recent LiDAR that was taken, so that they can compile as much of that as possible and start giving us some information about how quickly we can get those inundation maps in place. But I think the question was asked before about how are we going to know what happens to the river once we put the HESCOs in place too. That's another thing that we're hoping to learn from our engagement with Michael International, is to be able to model what the conditions might be once we install these barriers, understand, you know, better what the downstream effects might be. Time-wise, we're hoping that we'll have some information that will help us make better decisions about the design and placement of the HESCO barriers by the time we actually are placing the barriers. But brand new inundation maps, long-term models that would include what may happen with much higher events than what we've seen so far could still be out beyond that. I don't know exactly what the timeline is. We're saying that falls within the medium-term solution here. So very short term would be what homeowners can do themselves and installation of the HESCO barriers. Long term would be the general investigation, the new inundation maps and models, in terms of the long-term end product that would be usable and consumable by the public is probably somewhere in that medium-term timeline.
Like a year?
Potentially a year or so out. But we're hoping that by the end of, even this month, we'll start to have some additional information about what that timeline will be, and we will share that information with the public once we have more information available. Does that make sense? We're moving out on that as quickly as we possibly can. I promise. Thank you.
What about the modeling that's been done with Dow Engineering and Frontier Precision and that's been provided to the USCS and DOT? Those resources been made available to the city?
Yes, we're working with Dow, we're working with everyone that we're aware of, including the other federal agencies in the area. Unfortunately, the river has changed since the last, boom modeling was done. And because of that, that might be a good starting place for us, but we have to be careful about how we make use of that information to make decisions. So we're trying to gather as much of that information, consolidate it with what we now know about what has changed with the river since the last two, especially flood events have happened. And, you know, start to put together new models that can give us the most best accurate information we have about what to expect moving forward.
Yeah, one addition on that is, the build high volume model and the data input, and so with these whole models, they do not have information about water surfaces throughout the region because they would actually work with that day. So after this record August 2024 event, I went out there and I surveyed all the elevations that water reached throughout the Mendenhall River down to 100 foot. And that information is also needed and new and not previously available, and part of why those old models have limited value. But like you said, they'll still be used to build the newer models. Go ahead.
My favorite subject as a retired engineer and having done certain work for 40 years, dealing with elevations, and I'm kind of taken back. Well, I lived in the way for over 30. So I kind of know the area somewhat, and I know it's a floodplain basically. Has been for years and years. My house had 7.5 feet of fill put in it. That's how low it was when we were building the subdivision. The subdivision passed me down by the river where it jumped the bank on the Android 30 end. That area is a lot, there's not as much fill as we received, 35 years ago, maybe longer than that. My concern is why on earth do we not have the data that I thought FEMA and CBJ was have a FEMA rep downtown? Why haven't we had that information? Because it's critical thing we're dealing with, in my estimation, very basic elevation. Why is it important? The elevation of the flood event, obviously is important because that says how high the water is going to get. So you need to know what the elevation is in your yard. Now, I have a topo map in my yard, obviously because I have the equipment to do it and the knowledge, and it's kind of something kind of nice to know where the water goes, especially when it rains or you have other issues. It's pretty valuable for me now, but a lot of my neighbors don't. There's easy ways to get elevation if you can't get it from the logical sources, i.e. the FEMA people who should have been on top of this. That's how I feel about it. Pointing fingers, but it's a reality. Where's that data? That data should be available because it is a floodplain area. We didn't have the historical floods that they have in most places. This is totally unique, and I understand and I appreciate that. But that data should be collected, it should be made available so people can pick the appropriate mitigation for their home, because it's gonna be dependent on the height. And I'll give you an example. My neighbors less than 4 blocks away they're having to lift their entire home so that their house doesn't get flooded because their entire floor, the water came up so high in that area. All I received was water coming into my garage. A whole different set of circumstances, so the appropriate mitigation that needs to be done is gonna be totally different. My neighbor's gonna spend over $100,000 if they haven't already to get their house lifted. I'm gonna spend a couple of $100, the higher because I'm crippled, to put sandbags in front of my garage to keep the water from inundating going inside of there and causing more damage than it did before. I didn't get very much damage. So this thing about elevation is kind of critical, because it gets down again, no one seems to know, and I understand that point. No one knows how hot the water's gonna get, but I know how high. You can get simple elevations right in your front yard, i.e. you can go, as hydrants, your fire hydrants in your yard, they have elevations on. In front of the street, you can see nails in the ground that are in it on the road and on the sidewalk. That'll give you an elevation, and you call CDK, it's an engineering department, and they can tell you where they've had stuff in there, just like private, surveyors in town, civil engineer, companies and stuff, and they have a lot of data, so that you can find someone on where you can get and find where that elevation is, so that you can appropriately protect your home from the water that's going to be coming. You don't know how high it is, you know if it will be anything versus 15 or whatever it's supposed to be.
Okay, so the question here, or the question in my statement is, from a career engineer and surveyor, recognizing the challenging situation, but also asking where we keep talking about elevation, where that information is available. Is that a summary? Okay.
I have another government, I work for the federal government for 40 years. It's supposed to be available.
Yeah, okay, so elevation data, you can elevate your home, like many people are doing, and even had programs developed for that, so anyway, if you're planning on doing, you need to know what an elevation is, whether you're elevating your home or elevating your heat pump. If you look at the FEMA flood insurance rate maps, you need to understand that flood insurance rate maps do not include the risk of geo collapse. It does not include these catastrophic events. That's just an ordinary 1%, discharge from ordinary spring runoff. This is an extraordinary event above and beyond what's even considered in those FEMA flood maps. Just like your coastal flood maps do not include the risk of tsunamis. It's only the predictable, normal routine kind of flooding you get. So FEMA is in the process, did start some months ago, creating advisory maps, not a new regulatory map, but advisory maps of how high you should be elevated for this local off the risk. And my understanding is we just received the last key piece of data we needed from the Army Corps. They gave us a high watermark data from this last event. We're using to calibrate that model. And I'm told that in approximately 3 weeks, FEMA Region 10 will have those advisory maps out for the water surface elevation for local off risk into the future. And keep in mind, there's still an uncertainty factor there because, as you can hear from what you probably have heard from, and maybe tomorrow or the next day you might hear from some other experts, scientists studying this, there's still a great degree of uncertainty as to just how high these can get. So a general rule of thumb, you're going to find in numerous FEMA guidance documents, you get that advisory data, go 2 feet higher than that. Or even barring the FEMA advisory maps, if you don't want to wait that long, if you want to look down tomorrow, take your flood of record, which is probably this year's flood event, go 2 feet higher than that. So that's elevation. Now the elevation that's above sea level, right? So you need, as the gentleman was saying, you need to figure out what that means with height at your property. And I suspect that my, Region 10 counterparts, when they produce this elevation advisory map,
you're also gonna provide a depth grid in that too, so that'll help you figure out what does that mean in front of my house, how many feet at my house. So I expect to see something in approximately 3 weeks. And at that time, the FEMA reps will explain the uncertainty factors involved in that, act, because it's done pretty quickly based on, well, how many overflows have we had to limit out of these banks? So, I mean, there's, they'll explain the uncertainty factor, but whatever that data point is for your house, if you're gonna go to that expense of flipping your house, be wise, go on and.
All right, let's go to you now, and, yeah, sweater.
Okay. So if you put the HESCO barrier in, and there is a small failure, does that negate the problem, or will enough water get through the pinch-hole that will just flood our neighborhood?
So the question is, will a local breach in the HESCO barrier negate the protection of the barrier? The answer to that is the HESCO barrier will still provide partial protection in that case. Not as much water will make it through as if the entire reach is unprotected. But we recognize that potential scenario, whether there's a breach or there's a condition that there is a significantly larger event than historically happened. This overtops the HESCO barrier. Like all these things, it's a cost benefit analysis, like how much is it gonna cost? We can make the HESCO barrier pretty good call and know that ever overtopped, and that's way too expensive. So, the decision we made by the leadership team at the city, how high it's gonna be. But if it is overtopped, so there is a breach, there's gonna be design in place in the HESCO barriers to allow drainage back out of the barriers, so there's not be long-term ponding behind the barriers. So there's gonna be regularly spaced drainage pipes with one-way valves under the HESCO barrier. And then at the end of the river court, as you all know, we've got a waterfall running back into the Mendenhall there. So we're gonna leave a gap, a fillable gap, plug at the end of the river court that will stay open in the winter. And I think that's all these first snow removal, all right. And then monitoring suicide basin, when suicide basin starting to fill that gap in the river court will then be plugged, provide protection of the river court. And then if there is a breach that causes some level of flooding to the neighborhoods or an overtopping event, that flood can then be removed to allow drainage to the neighborhoods, then ponding behind the HESCO barrier. Way up there in the back.
Thank you guys for being here. One of the things you mentioned in the beginning in your presentation was that the Army Corps of Engineers can do dredging. And I want to know where we're at with that, specifically dredging at the mouth of the river, where you can literally drop the level of Mendenhall Lake, given more capacity to absorb down.
Okay, so the question is, dredging was previously mentioned as an Army Corps product or service, and what is the status of looking into that? So I think the answer to that is in this range of short, medium, and long-term solutions. For the Army Corps to do any project of that scale, it's going to involve changing the river geometry. Use all these kinds of solutions that are proposed. There's a whole range of possible solutions. A solution like that requires a study for the Army Corps to be able to implement a long-term solution like that. And that's the reality of how the Army Corps works.
There's also a little bit more to that as well. Okay, so it is in the Corps' authority to do it, right? But it also has to be maintained. That would not be on the Corps. That would be on the city. So if the Corps comes in and does it, then the city has to pick up the tab for future maintenance. Right? And if it's never happened, that the level of cost is something the city has to basically buy off on and say, yes, we're willing to do it. So an example is the 250 miles from Homer to Anchorage to the port. That is maintained by the Corps of Engineers. The city of Anchorage has to pay for that. Now, originally, it was dredged by the Corps, but it's, the city of Anchorage is paying the Corps of Engineers to contract that to get it done. So that's where the city leadership comes into that. Yes, the Corps can do it, absolutely, it's within our authorities to do, but once it's done, it's gotta be maintained. It's the same thing, we build a long-term project, and I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here. We build a long-term project, we turn it over to the city. And then we inspect it every 3 to 5 years to make sure it's being operated and maintained in accordance to stay in the PL 8499 program, which is what's paying for the HESCO barrier through advanced measures, which is a temporary thing. If we do levy, right, that has to be maintained by the city, and if it's not, you fall out of the PL 8499 program, and now the Corps will not rehabilitate the levee if it's damaged in the next flood. So there's like, it's kind of sort of a catch-22, right? Yes, it's big money up front from the federal government, but the federal government wants to make sure they're not throwing good money after bad, right? So it's kind of sort of a double-edged sword. What does operation and maintenance cost? I can tell you, anybody in here who's an engineer or project manager knows that the operation and maintenance of a project is much higher than the initial cost to put that project in. Much higher, because it's 20 years or 50 years or whatever, right? So it's over the life of, from cradle to grave. That's a lot of money, and the taxpayers probably need to vote on it, and like, you all need to come up with a decision for that, because it's can be very overwhelmingly expensive. So that's why we come up with these temporary measures to save lives and property in the short term, so that we can come up with the best solution that's gonna be the easiest for you to maintain, the best solution financially and physically, the best solution to prevent more damage to property and lives. That's the point, right? Yeah, okay, go ahead, I'm supposed to be.
Okay, so I appreciate the federal government coming up with all kinds of wonderful technical solutions. I'm the veteran of a similar effort 8 years ago. The federal government gave us $7 million to reinforce the riverbank on Meander Way. Everybody looked at all the designs, it was wonderful, it's gonna be perfect, nothing was gonna change. The riverbank again, because it was gonna be built to standard with the federal government. The cost to each homeowner was $70,000. The cost the federal government kicked in was $225,000. It was $300,000 per property. This one, we get money for the HESCO barriers grade. We have to do all this reinforcement in one of these HESCO barriers. The estimate that I hear is $7-8 million. If you divide that by 70 or 80 people along the river, that's $100,000 per property owner. I don't think that anybody's gonna go for it. My experience the last time was out of 30 people, 25 agreed to it, 5 people said, hell no, I'll take you to court, it's not gonna happen, and it did not happen. So what is gonna be the outlook on the financing for the properties? Is it gonna be only the 80 people on the river, or is it gonna be the 300 people behind it, or is it gonna be the citywide thing? Those are gonna be the key thing. Technically, the Corps of Engineers, HESCO are doing a great job, but when it comes down to financing, and it comes down to people that just been impacted, having to restore all their damage, pay $80,000 for the riprap they already put in, and then come up with another $100,000, that's a big cost.
So I'll take this one because this is a money question. It gets back to, once again, the Army Corps is providing the HESCO barriers, but the community is gonna have to decide to bear the cost of the site prep and the installation. So at an October 21st assembly meeting, City Manager Kester had introduced various options for paying for that site prep and installations. They ranged everything from general CDJ, so that's every single person who lives in CDJ bearing that cost, to just the riverfront property owners paying that cost, to, what they call a partial LID, which means like, a fraction of the cost is, covered by the overall CDJ coffers. So if you live on, in the flooded area, you're part of that as well, plus an LID, for the people who are considered to be the beneficiaries of that installation and of that technology. And that was what was proposed on October 21st, and that's where the assembly seemed most comfortable. They're going to talk about that again at the November 18th assembly meeting, and sort of what those fractions look like. Is it 50-50 or is it something else? I think that the general thought is that it wouldn't just be even in a partial LID, so part of all of the community pays, and then part of the other fraction that beneficiaries pay. The general thought process is if the beneficiaries extend beyond just the riverfront property owners, that and there are various ways that, it's really hard to draw that boundary, because wherever you draw that boundary, somebody's gonna object. That's just the reality of it. But we do have things like, we have the data, and we have the 16-foot inundation map already. We have data on houses that were impacted in the 2024 eucalypt already. So those are sort of logical places to look in terms of who the LID would cover in that partial portion of the LID versus the other portion of the whole community space. But I would really encourage you, this is also just maybe a good segue to, we have a load of information at juno.org. If you're on your cell phone right now and you say juno.org, the very first thing that's going to show up at the very top is in a red box. It says flood response, and it's very prominent. You can't miss it. If you hit on that flood response page, there's lots of information. Then it gets challenging because you get into this, like, it's too much information, there's not enough information. But there's a section called public meetings. And if you click that, that's where the information for tonight's public meeting, the announcement was there, the recording will be there, the slides will be there. When I referenced the October 21st assembly meeting and the proposal for this partial LID, that's part of the agenda for that meeting is there. Every assembly meeting since August 5th has covered the flood. So there's material on every single assembly meeting talking about the flood. So that's what I mean when I'm referencing that October 21st meeting, and the recordings are there too. So people can see it themselves as well. But I say tune in on November 18th. That's where they're going to start getting a little bit more nitty gritty on how to allocate the cost.
All right, Phil, we'll take you up next, quick lineup.
Yeah, very good. I also work for the federal government. This is a question I had received in my agency, which I work for the National Weather Service. I'm the head of the forecast office here. I'm the guy that pushes the button. Right. We get hit with this question, so maybe somebody from the floor can answer it. This problem emanating from federal land is a question that we get, which is the water's coming from federal land. The lake is on federal land. Does that change the fuller stance on who pays for the dredging?
Good question. Your fault. The oil spill starts on your property, you gotta clean the hole that's all the way downstream.
I don't know if Dan, you know the answer to that? Okay, I'd be happy to ask around and get that information to.
Thanks for being here.
Who hasn't asked a question yet? Who wants to? Okay, you got that.
I wonder back to the costs, and this is something that my wife brought up in the last couple of meetings, and I'd like to keep it on the top of everybody's mind. LID is local improvement district. Emergency flood control measures are not improvements. So essentially, the discussion has been, to charge people who've been damaged already to protect the entire community. You can't tell me which properties are in danger. You can't tell me what the unintended consequences of these HESCO barriers or any other measures will be. So this idea, I know that the city, the staff is pushing for LIDs because it's a quick answer. But I think there's bigger problems. And the one thing that I will say, just to end my comment, is that Mayor Weldon said in one of the early meetings after the flood, when somebody asked her why they weren't preparing for this, she said, we were preparing for last year's flood. So essentially, they're preparing to charge us for last year's flood.
Yeah.
You have not, green jacket in the back, you're not, that's, but yeah.
If you want to reply to your speaker, what do you guys have to say to them? And my reply would be participate in the November 18th public meeting. I mean, that was, and then it's the same thing. The assembly meets at the hour first. Make your thoughts down. Thank you. I just have a quick question for Josh, actually. You mentioned something about that we haven't ordered HESCO yet. So I have a little bit of maybe confusion in my timeline of this. I thought when Manager Kester came to a community meeting at the church, or not at the community meeting, but before that, the question was, does the assembly approve her ordering HESCO? And I thought we moved forward with that. And then at the October meeting, the mayor actually interrupted Assembly Member Bryson to say, HESCO's been decided, phase 1, phase 2 has been decided. Now it sounds like nothing has been decided. My question is actually, as a resident, I was thinking, oh, great, we've got HESCO ordered. And then if we have misunderstandings or changes in how we want to use them, we've got them. But what you mentioned earlier today made it sound like we might not order them at all. I was just hoping you could clarify, because it would help us make public comments if we knew, like, can we recommend something other than phase 1, phase 2, or is it phase 1, phase 2, or we don't get them at all? Thank you.
So the HESCO barriers, the Army Corps has told us that they could get them to us in about 2 weeks. They're pretty fast turnaround time. So we have had the assembly, right? The assembly has weighed in at multiple points and said, yeah, we really like this HESCO barrier, this HESCO idea. Then as they continue to ask questions from the staff, we continue to come to them and provide them with more information. Since we're thinking about the timeframe for kind of winter construction is not ideal. And given that they could be here in 2 to 3 weeks, there's not as much of an urgency to place the order and then get them, and then we'll I guess stockpile them somewhere, and while all these other decisions are being made about phase 1 versus phase 2 and how to pay for them and all of those pieces. So there's not as we felt kind of comfortable that we didn't have to order them immediately, because we think the construction timeframes could be probably February to March of 2025, and we could get them in plenty of time.
Denise, can I add a little bit to what you just said? So the issue with stockpiling the HESCO barriers, so winter's coming, right? When is breakup in the lower 48? Before breakup up here, right? So you need the HESCO barriers in place before basically the end of July next year, correct? Am I making sense? So if we deliver the HESCO barriers now, right, it's all on the Corps. If someone in the lower 48 needs those HESCO barriers in their March breakup, guess who's paying for shipping and losing the HESCO barriers? Juno. This is why they don't want to pull the trigger until they know they're going to use them right away. That is a really good reason, financially, a very good reason. And yes, we can get them here in 2 to 3 weeks. So what the city is looking for in their defense, they're looking for taking delivery of them somewhere in February, March timeframe, right? So they get them here and they start building the Hesco barrier wall, or whatever you wanna call it, temporary levee. Right, through advanced measures, it's all on the Corps, and as long as you're putting them up, the Corps is not gonna ask for them back to cover some other place that's flooding down the Mississippi or what have you, and you know that is, those are really big rivers down there, way bigger than the Mendenhall River, and way more dangerous, because we're also talking the amount of money that's, on the Missouri River and the Mississippi River, you know, we got Kansas City, you know, I mean, big cities with huge amounts of infrastructure. The Corps is a federal entity, right? They're gonna protect the federal, environment. We're working with Juneau to protect Juneau, but they don't wanna hurt themselves by taking, I don't know what it's gonna cost to get. I think you're gonna need more than what we originally thought, right? We were planning on 25,000 linear feet. I think you're gonna need a lot more than that. Okay, because we need to go higher. That's what we're figuring. That quantity hasn't been determined yet. More work needs to be done. Once that quantity is determined, they'll have it all written up and ready to pull the trigger. They'll send it to me, I'll pull the trigger and the stuff will start arriving. If we bring it here now, you could conceivably lose it and have to pay for the shipping back. That's what I believe that's what you don't want to do. What's that?
Phase 2 was announced. Phase 2 was originally described as happening a year after phase 1, but originally Manager Kester described it as needing to order all of the HESCO for phase 1, phase 2 at once. But it sounds like you're saying actually the opposite, we'll order phase 1 and then the following year order phase 2?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying phase 2, that plan has been adjusted. Phase 2 is more of a planning phase. We're not ready to pull the trigger on phase 2. We're gonna pull the trigger on phase 1 first. And then while that's happening, determinations will be made, determinations will be made for what phase 2 requirements are going to be. And when that is determined and the plan is solid, and also we've learned a lot from putting in phase 1, we pull the trigger on phase 2 and get it here. Because it's still 2 to 3 weeks. Now, there is another danger that the city is aware of it, but it might not be in the forefront of their mind. So the HESCO barriers are made in England. It takes 45 days to get additional HESCOs here. And you can only order them from England in 15,000 linear feet lengths or amounts. And then they get shipped from England. So you're looking at somewhere 60 to 90 days. Am I crazy?
No, that is correct. They are gonna have a US manufacturing plant here stood up by March, but currently that is, yep.
So these are other things that come into the phase 1, phase 2 thing. When we order the first bunch, they'll deliver whatever they have in stock, which is a considerable amount. And then we're looking at, for every reorder, we're looking at 60 to 90 days and only 15,000 linear feet per delivery. So we're trying to make sure that you don't get screwed. That's what we're trying to do. And if you receive it all, and you receive all of that amount and you had to ship it out, that's never happened, right? Because they're always all used on the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, like the huge rivers, right? But this particular danger, and I consider it a danger, I just came back from North Carolina, by the way, all right, like a week ago. So I've seen devastating flooding, not just here, I've seen it other places. Total cities wiped off the map, literally. Don't want to see that happen, right? So we want to get the temporary measure, or the advanced measure temporary HESCO levy in as quickly as possible. And if there isn't a threat because the glacier starts freezing up and you don't build it during the winter, which is going to cost you more to do, if you wait till February, March, it just makes more financial sense to do it that way. If I was understood, if I didn't babble. So these are the things, I mean, they are really digesting a lot of information. So they have your best interests at heart, they really do.
Thanks, Dan. You've had a question for a while.
I think it's imperative for the city to gather much more information. Because there are property owners that are not impacted by the river, that live on the river, far from it reaching their end. And for the good of the community, they're willing to put the Hessel barrier up. But it's not a benefit to them at all. So I think when you're looking at who's for the good of the community and who's gonna suffer, we're gonna suffer financially just because we have a barrier in our backyard. But I think that has to be looked at. And also, I just want to talk about the dredging. Across from us, there's significant erosion on the bank. Significant, like 25 feet, this last flood, okay? I can see 4 houses that I never saw before from my river, okay? That river, that is falling into the river, now it's building, so that when we're talking about dredging, that's what I'm concerned about, that the river is now rising because of that.
You're 100% correct, it is.
Okay.
So the sediment in the river channel will limit the channel's ability to continue to carry the same amount of water, right? I mean, it's just common sense, right? You got a bucket, you put a bunch of sand in the bottom of the bucket, it's gonna hold as much water as it did before? No.
It's really hard to say that until we actually do a hydraulic modeling on it. Where the sediment is going.
Right, he's the hydrologist, right?
So your point is noted that, you recommend more data collection and that you are noting ongoing river evolution, significant ongoing evolution and daily evolution.
It's massive amount of trees also.
Yeah.
I do want to make a comment. We have a video of a tree harpooning into our neighbor's house. Straight on. And with a hole this big.
Yeah.
So I hope it doesn't go into that area. I'm sure it was unusual. And we also had a huge tree. 50-foot tree come up.
Yeah, I've heard the reports and walked the river. We all have. We've seen the holes in the houses from the rocket trees coming up. So that is recognized, and it is an extremely challenging situation at the amount of evolution that's ongoing. Not good, not rocket, excuse me. Yeah.
I was just wondering if the harpoon.
Oh, okay. Keith talked about that a little bit before. But his experiences, and feel free to add on if you want, his experience has been that when debris impacts the HESCO barriers, we do not rip out the HESCO barriers because of the cellular structure and the mass of the HESCO barriers. So that is a concern that we all had, and exactly why we reached out to the national expert to get his hands-on experience with large debris hitting the HESCO barrier. Yeah, thank you. All right, finally your turn.
I hear a lot of talk about studies, right? And I might misquote you, but somebody in the room just said a moment ago that we need to install the first phase and wait and see what happens. We need to see how the river responds to it. Every year, there's gonna be another requirement for studies. If that's always gonna be the answer, how do we move past that? And are we really comfortable saying, let's install these HESCO barriers on Marion and Killoway and around Meander, and we'll just wait and see what happens downstream? We're sitting in a school that is downstream. Our sewage treatment plant is downstream. I don't want to gamble with that level of infrastructure and then have the city come back later on and say, hey, now you gotta pay for that too.
Okay, I think this is probably a question for both the Army Corps and for the city of Juneau. We talked about this, just time right in the last question, the evolution is ongoing. We talked about these short, medium, and long-term solutions, and that medium-term solution of modeling. And part of that, the first phase of that modeling is to look at the impacts on the river corridor and the channel when there's a HESCO barrier installed there.
If you were to talk about, so with excavators, look at this impact on modeling, that will inform the decision making about phase one of the excavators. You're correct. If there were phase two, the decision would likely be made to look at additional hydraulic modeling at that time to cover the entire area that phase two would cover. Yeah, it's expensive, challenging.
And I might add, I mean, the reality is, I think you point to a good point, which is there is a balance between studying to get the answers to everybody's questions to their satisfaction versus taking action in a timely manner. And I mean, it's in some ways like an impossible task, and everyone would wind up somewhere probably slightly different on that continuum. But part of the reason that, phase one, was envisioned is that we were trying to, CPJ with our engineers, along with, all this technical expertise that we've gotten from the Corps, and all the something that the Corps has given to CPJ for free, is trying to see what can we do relatively quickly that will, have a net positive benefit on the most homes, which is why there's even a phase one versus a phase two, because we know that phase one wouldn't cover all of the homes in all of the situations. But it's just a matter of sort of getting started and some of that, best professional judgment, while we're engaging Michael Baker, on these hydrology and hydrologic models, kind of going in tandem. But I think that's part of why, like, all the studies, we'll have the best answers for the long term, for the studies, but that gets you to that general investigation study, and that gets you to that 7 to 10 year time frame. So it is true that we have less information in the next 6 months than we do in a 10-year process, and there's some risk tolerance there.
I know you guys both asked questions. Has anyone who hasn't asked a question got a question? I don't think you asked a question yet.
Are there going to be more standards handed out? I know they went out before we got it.
Sure, yes, so, first of all, apologies on that. We thought we were receiving a certain number of sandbags, and we received less than we had anticipated. And we have talked before, about getting more sandbags. And this might be kind of good feedback from this group. When we had handed out the sandbags, we also wanted to provide the sand. We wanted to do that before everything starts freezing up. Now we're kind of getting into that learning with the freezing level, so it would be challenging for us to have the same exact sort of event with a big pile of sand that doesn't freeze up during the winter time. So we could either do that similar sort of event with the sandbags and the sand in the spring, when we think the big pile of sand won't be frozen, or handing out, sandbags. We could ask the Corps for more sandbags if they're willing to give to us, and we could distribute them even in the winter, but we wouldn't have sand. So maybe I'll do a straw poll here, and I'll ask you all the question, and that is, maybe the first question would be, I'm going to ask it both ways. You raise your hand if you would want more sandbags in the wintertime, even though CPJ would not be providing the sand.
That's a weird question, because we were told we had to pick them up in October, and then we could fill them in the spring. So I would say, yes, I'll take 3 sandbags anytime you'll give them out. And if not, we'll wait till spring to fill them. I just think it's a loaded question.
Okay, yeah, I'll ask it the other way I hear what you're saying, I appreciate that. But just to ask it the other way, the other option is that CPJ could wait to do a sandbag distribution event in the spring with the sand on, on site, similar to what we did in the fall. By a show of hands, is there anyone who prefers that sort of distribution? distribution? Okay, well, we're gonna keep asking those sorts of questions, but at least sort of straw poll here, seems like people are more interested in, getting them in the spring with a sort of a fuller service, you know, having CJ provide the fan as well.
Thank you for enduring my repeat questions. I kind of have a joint four city question, so, to piggyback on we're looking for the net positive effect, I completely understand that, and I think that's admirable, should be our goal. There's a elephant in the room, and that is unpermitted or fully permitted work that has happened to the river. For us to pretend that the river jumping at Killwitch after one season of a bunch of rock work, we're kind of maybe reenacting that exact scenario here, where we're gonna then install miles of rock work and not necessarily know what's gonna happen. In my mind, what happened and what people did or didn't do beyond their permits, or perhaps the fact that we're doing this all on an emergency basis without following the permitting process or the study process that ensures that we don't create more problems, is we might create the same situation just in another neighborhood. So my question is, are we doing that step so that we don't just jump the next bend, destroy the next neighborhood? Right now, we know where it goes. To change that, we have no idea. Are we doing the right preps so that we don't have a Killwitch do
So Nate had a question on it before, but that's part of the hydraulic modeling, just looking at the impact of the estuaries on the flow in the river.
Including all the rock work.
The new modeling has updated LiDAR for the entire reach. So it will include, and I was on a few weeks ago, I think. So anything that has been completed until the last few weeks will be included in that geometry for the model. In terms of the impact of the rock work on this year's 2024 event, I'm not saying that there was no factor, or I'm not commenting on that factor, but I would recognize that at the gates on Mendenhall Lake, the water level is a higher than it was in the 2022 event. So there was significantly more water going down the river than there was in 2023.
I'm sorry, I'm really not trying to.
That's great.
I do appreciate all your answers and your questions. Can you explain why does the modeling take so long? Sorry.
Why does the modeling take so long? I mean, I don't understand that process, what was doing it. I just think we live in a pretty technologically advanced age where that seems to me like it should be able to be plugged into a computer to spit out some data for us.
Yeah, why does anything take so long? Great question. There's a lot of pieces involved. There's a lot of agencies involved. There's the reality of, and you can cut me off, but the reality of the process that government and democracy, how fast it moves, and the rights of everyone involved, and considering everyone's rights before a decision is made, and the way that works with the assembly and the city manager making decisions. So you are correct that the actual act of the modeling itself is not extremely, does not encompass the kind of actual case get it done. But then there's the reality of the whole process of any government agency or multiple government agencies working together to pay for and make a decision to do such a study. And then, then there's this interagency factor. So it's like this flood happens in August. The Weather Service, so great. They go out there and they mark all these high water events. That's awesome. I know it happens. I love my calendar. It's like what projects I'm gonna drop, come down here as fast as I can, conserve the high water marks. So that's a leadership question in my office. The other day, I told another airport project, I didn't have time for them. And they told me their project is important too. And that's totally true. That's another community where people live that are important that I'm getting pulled off to work on this project, which
is the way it is, so these are all these. Yeah, and that's, none of us, I have more work than I could ever do, and I'm sure all of us do, and so it's leadership prioritizing projects and putting people on them, and, I was in a national meeting about this, and one of the guys in DC was like, well, could you finish this GI study in 5 years instead of 10? And our chief of civil works was like, well, can you help us fill all our vacancies? Can you deal with our retention problem? Can you make it so it takes less than a year to fill a position? So those are all the pieces that make these relatively simple things take so long. Do you know on that?
Today, and it's really just a flavor of what Mike was talking about. I mean, even, we start super boring, we start in the scope of work. We have the scope, but then everybody wants to look at the scope of work, right? CDJ wants to look at the scope of work, or DOT wants to look at the scope of work, and so does the Army Corps, so does NRCS, and so does the Forest Service, because that's where, their land is. And it's valuable, but because, excuse me, like NOAA and the National Weather Service, because all of those agencies have expertise and they all have data sets. So you have to kind of scour and look around to the partner agencies to see who has the right people, to look at the scope of work, to review it, who has the right data sets, gathering all of the, the data, what's already available, what people think that they need. We're trying to do it as fast as we can, but that's another sort of balancing act between, like, CBJ could have just done it alone, but then people said, hey, how can we talk to the Army Corps or DOT, and because all those partners are valuable and have, valuable pieces of information. DOT has really extensive information around the bridges. They have extensive LiDAR information. The Forest Service has their own information around like the lake and some of their properties, so it's also an active collaboration, which I think, it results in a better product, but it also takes some time. I don't know.
Thanks, Louise. I would just say, in the face of all the bureaucracy that you talked about, we're moving as quickly as we can. I know the city has really prioritized trying to get these hydrologic and hydraulic studies moving as quickly as we possibly could. We did just sign the contract to get that started. We're meeting with that contractor and other agencies next week so that we can confer and make sure that somebody's data point matches up with somebody else's data point and that we're all on the same page. We want to make sure that we take that step so that any work that springs forth from that, there's a consensus that we're moving in the right path, starting from the right data set. And then the last thing I'll say is, there are also changes in technology when it comes to this, changes in the state of the art. So the models that we have right now are A, proprietary, and B, they're called 1D models, and we're hoping to move forward with an open source 2D model. It's something that could be more usable and consumable by the public in the future, could be more usable and consumable by other public agencies, but making sure that all of those things match up and the product we move forward with is as useful to us as possible also comes with a little bit of time component. So we're working as quickly as we can. I think we're putting the resources that we have available to us in the locations that are going to be the most useful for us to carry forward with a temporary installation of a barrier that is going to be as useful as we can possibly make it with the information we have. So hopefully that helps. Assuage concerns.
I got a question. Is it true that day after tomorrow, you guys are all gonna be available that we can come and ask questions right next door?
Heck yeah, it's 4 o'clock, right? Yeah.
Time then.
4 o'clock on Thursday. We'll see you there.
I got a whole list of questions, but it's getting
Cool.
late.
Yeah. Anyone who hasn't asked a question. Or who hasn't asked, okay.
So I don't have a question, but I want to make a comment. I work up on the glacier, so I fly over that area quite often. In the summertime and watching it, and just so people are aware, that basically is getting big. Every time we have one of these major flood events, we lose yards of ice on the Kirkland side of that basin. So the expectation that this is gonna get better anytime soon is, in my opinion, not being a scientist or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good first-hand, anecdote, example, observation about the reality of the situation. There's obviously this observed trend that the events are getting larger. There's also maybe the glacier is thinning, but like you said, just because it's thinning doesn't mean like it's getting longer. And additionally, there's ice in the lake that is taking up some of the volume that water could, potentially significant amount of volume that the water can take up, and that's another factor that can make when that ice is gone, other events. There's also the reality that there are other basins of glacier that could also become future Gokloff basin, even if this basin did melt out or the glacier retreated and this basin stopped Gokloffing. Which is why some solutions that have been thrown out there dealing specifically with the suicide basin are not sustainable long-term solutions, because that would not address the fact that in the future other basins are also possible Gokloff outburst sources. Did you have a question? Okay, great.
I just want to say thank you for your patience and for answering all of our questions and for being here. And my last thing is as a community, what can we do to support you? What can we do to make this easier, not just on ourselves, but on you guys?
I'm happy. Thank you for saying that. That means a lot. There's nothing I really need to be here. This is like my, to get to this sort of meeting. I'm sure I will, you know. You want to say anything?
I have.
Yeah, you
have
can.
a piece too. So first of all, thank you for that. I know this has been, beyond traumatic for so many people in this community. And of course, we live in this community and we all know somebody we've had our own staff who have been impacted. And if we haven't been impacted, we all have a friend or a family member who's been impacted. I think that there are a few ways that citizens can be really supportive. One is, we are constantly trying to go to the federal delegation and ask for support. And one very particular kind of support that we still need is we need support for the Army Corps to get money in their budget for this long-term general investigation study. And I do also just want to say that we had also a while back sent out another email because people had asked, like, what can we do? And we had asked the federal government for some draft language. And, if you would like for the federal government to declare a federal disaster declaration, here's a draft letter, or, you of course can personalize it. And a lot of people wrote those letters and they went really, really far. And of course, none of us know exactly what goes into the president's decision making, but that stuff really helps. And so I think that's one really important factor is, advocating for that money for that long-term fix so that we could, I think none of us really, we all wish that we had sort of the long-term fix. It's just that's going to take more time, which is why we're talking about that in the interim. The other thing is wanted to thank every person who is a riverfront property owner who has talked to CJ and the Army Corps about, giving us access to your property, allowing us to talk to you about your own experiences, and all of that information that you provide to us. It helps us make our design better. And so that's been tremendously helpful, and I would say to keep doing that. I think a lot of the questions that we've gotten from people have been really, really helpful. A lot of brain power, helping us to sort of make sure that there's not, something we haven't thought of, something we bounce things off the Army Corps all the time. We get questions, people write to, what response, or they write to the Borough Assembly. And then, that's a really good point. What do you think? And Mike gets tons of emails from me like that. So that stuff is helpful, and we are hearing you, and we are sort of bouncing it off the Army Corps as our experts. So appreciate that.
To just say, taking you all the time that you have to share with us the ideas. Been very good. Thank you very much.
It was nice to see you out on the river today.
Yeah.